Chapter 351. Another half a month passed by. During this half a month, Immortal didn't go out. She just quietly cultivated in the virtual sky world and refined her magic weapons. The cultivators from Tianyan sect didn't come again, and Ayin also didn't disturb her. This made her sigh of relief, but at the same time, she felt a bit worried. Was that person Ye Wuxiang? Did Master Song Feng come to Yunzhong with her? What happened between her and Tianyan sect? She really wanted to know about these things, but it was inconvenient to ask in the current situation, so she could only suppress her curiosity and continue to refine her magic weapons. While she was concentrating on refining, she suddenly heard Ayin's anxious voice. Fairy, fairy. Immortal opened her eyes, stopped breathing, put away her magic weapons, and came out of the virtual sky world. What's the matter? It was dark outside, so Ayin didn't dare to enter the house. She reported in the courtyard, Fairy, someone wants to see you. Immortal focused her mind and sensed there were other cultivators in the small courtyard. An early-stage core formation cultivator and 2 foundation building cultivators. After thinking for a while, she removed the restriction and stepped out of the house. The core formation cultivator waiting in the courtyard was unexpectedly Madame Chizu. Upon seeing her coming out, Madame Chizu smiled and bowed to greet her. Fellow Daoist Qingwei, I'm here to disturb you again. Immortal was a bit surprised, but she calmly returned the greeting and asked, Fellow Daoist, is there something important for you to visit so late at night? Madame Chizu frowned and forced a smile. There's indeed something. May I ask if fellow Daoist Qingwei knows the female cultivator who lives nearby? The fairy, who lived in another small courtyard shopkeeper Dong mentioned? Immortal shook her head. To be honest, fellow Daoist Chizu, I haven't met any cultivators since I came to North Pole Island, and I haven't left the house for the past half a month. Really? The expression on Madame Chizu's face was very strange. She heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, she looked even more worried. She thought for a while and asked again, Then these past few days, did fellow Daoist Divine Sense discover any traces of other cultivators? This question made Immortal raise her eyebrows. Fellow Daoist Chizu, you should know that cultivators keep their distance from each other. Since it's someone else's residence over there, of course, I won't use my divine sense to investigate. This was an unwritten rule between cultivators. Cultivators had a very strong sense of self-protection. A place like a cave residence was absolutely not allowed to be invaded by outsiders. If others used their divine sense to investigate, they would most likely be regarded as a person with ulterior motives. Realizing that her question was somewhat inappropriate, Madame Chizu was startled for a moment before she revealed a smile and said apologetically, I'm sorry, my words were inappropriate. To tell you the truth, we've been investigating for half a month and have already found out the identity of the thief. It just so happens that he lives in the courtyard closest to you. But when we arrived, we couldn't find him. I remembered that fellow Daoist Qingwei happened to be nearby, so I came to ask. Immortal was dumbfounded. Such a coincidence? Isn't that so? When I first heard the news, I also didn't dare to believe it. Madame Chizu's gaze was fixed on her. Although she had a smile on her face, her expression was somewhat nervous. Immortal smiled bitterly in her heart. Perhaps this Madame Chizu was worried that she was also an accomplice. That person stole something from Tianyan sect, and she just happened to go to Jade Qilin Pavilion. Furthermore, her figure and accent were similar. After she clarified the matter, it turned out that that person also happened to live near her. With so many coincidences, how could she not suspect her? Thinking up to this point, Immortal sighed. Fellow Daoist Chizu, was that person also a core formation cultivator? Madame Chizu nodded. Her gaze shifted and she said, Because the stolen item is precious, our sect's nascent soul seniors have already set out. Presumably, they'll be able to retrieve it in a few days. Upon hearing her answer, Immortal said faintly, Then I wish your sect will be able to successfully retrieve the lost item. After saying that, the two of them were somewhat speechless. After standing for a while, Madame Chizu finally smiled and took her leave. Since fellow Daoists didn't see it, I'll take my leave. I'm deeply sorry for disturbing you so late at night. Tienge showed a faint smile. No problem. Fellow Daoist Chizu doesn't need to be polite. I still have something to do, so I won't be seeing you off. Madame Chizu nodded with a smile, then turned around and left with the two foundation-building disciples. When they were far away and there were no longer any traces of cultivators around, Tienge turned around and said, Ayin, everything's fine now. You can go back and rest. Yes, Ayin answered. She watched as Tienge turned around and entered the cultivation room, then she also returned to her small side room. Once she entered the cultivation room, Tienge immediately started to cast the restriction. Her gaze shifted to a corner. Come out. Shortly after she spoke, a shadow slowly appeared in the corner. That shadow became clearer and clearer until finally, a person appeared. The person was dressed in black and had a delicate and pretty face. It was Nie Wuxiang. You can actually find me? Nie Wuxiang's voice was low and hoarse. Tienge smiled. She sat down at the table and poured 2 cups of tea. It's been many years since we last met. Fellow Daoist Nie, we're really fated. Nie Wuxiang frowned but didn't answer. Instead, she walked towards Tienge and sat across from her. How did you find me? Tienge stared at her. Her gaze swept around the room and she said with a faint smile, Not only did you enter this courtyard, but you also entered my room. I laid my own unique formation in this room. Although your concealment technique is brilliant, I can still find you. I see. Nie Wuxiang nodded, then picked up the teacup and took a sip. Tienge's gaze flickered. She didn't quite understand what Nie Wuxiang meant. Hiding in her room without telling her seemed to be an offense. But Nie Wuxiang still dared to come in even though she knew there was a restriction here and drank the tea she poured without any wariness. This Nie Wuxiang seemed to be certain that she wouldn't harm her? Fellow Daoist Nie, Tienge said after a long time, how did you come to Yunzhong? And why did you steal Tianyensec's things? Nie Wuxiang looked up and slightly raised the corners of her mouth. She said, In fact, you want to ask whether my master also came or not, right? Tienge paused for a moment then smiled. Do you still need to ask? You stole Tianyensec's things and hid in my place, so your master definitely isn't with you. Nie Wuxiang was stunned. She lowered her eyes and held the teacup without saying anything. Tienge felt the situation before her was a bit strange. She and Nie Wuxiang's respective masters had great enmity. There was kindness and enmity between them, but the two of them met in Yunzhong, thousands of miles away from the celestial pole. If that was all, it wouldn't be a big deal. But now, Nie Wuxiang stole something from the number 1 sect on North Pole Island and hid in her place, seemingly without any wariness. Why didn't she remember her relationship with Nie Wuxiang being so good? In any case, Nie Wuxiang was well aware that she was inside the formation and restriction, but she was still so calm, so she probably didn't have any hostility. Just as Tienge was thinking, Nie Wuxiang stopped contemplating, looked up and asked, Fellow Daoist how did you come to Yunzhong? Where's your husband? Did he come with you? Tienge was stunned. I have a Daoist partner? Nie Wuxiang's lips curved into a smile. Fellow Daoist don't underestimate the fame of the two of you. Your husband formed his nascent soul in his early 200 years and is in the limelight in the celestial pole. As for you, you're also a genius who formed your gold core before turning 100 years old. The news of the two of you cultivating as dual cultivators has pretty much spread in the celestial pole. As long as I pay attention, I'll naturally find out. Tienge really didn't expect it. Forget about Qin Shi, at least she didn't think she was that famous. However, Nie Wuxiang mentioning this made her notice another thing. Fellow Daoist Nie, my dual cultivation only took 3 to 5 years. Did you also arrive in Yunzhong recently? Nie Wuxiang nodded and cast a sidelong glance at her. Fellow Daoist I was the one who asked you just now. Tienge smiled. In the beginning, I was the one who asked fellow Daoist Nie how you came to Yunzhong, but fellow Daoist Nie also didn't answer. The two of them stared at each other. After staring for a while, they both felt a bit bored, so they withdrew their gazes and sighed. Their sighs were of the same mind. The two of them were stunned. They looked at each other and couldn't help but smile. With such a smile, the two of them imperceptibly became a bit closer. Those messy grievances were also temporarily thrown to the back of their minds. "All right, I'll answer first," Nie Wuxiang said. Nie Wuxiang said, "I got a treasure from my master. With the help of this treasure, I was able to safely cross the South Sea. But I went in the wrong direction and drifted to North Pole Island." She then looked at Mo Tiange. "What about you? How did you come to Yunzhong? I don't see your husband. Don't tell me you're also alone?" Mo Tiange answered, "Yes, I'm indeed alone. Originally, I just broke through to the middle stage of the core formation realm, so I went out to travel. Later, I accidentally found a path, so I came to Yunzhong." The two of them spoke vaguely. After all, their relationship was complicated, so some things didn't need to be explained too clearly. After giving a brief explanation, Mo Tiange asked, "Fellow Daoist Nie, you stole something from Tianyan's sect and then hid in my place. What's the meaning of this?" "What? You don't want me to hide?" Nie Wuxiang asked instead of answering. Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. She then shook her head. "I don't want to meddle in your business, nor do I want to catch thieves for Tianyan's sect. Where you are has nothing to do with me." Upon hearing that, Nie Wuxiang smiled. "That being the case, why do you have to ask?" Mo Tiange frowned and said, "Fellow Daoist Nie, you're now in my cultivation room. If I don't ask, how can I continue living here?" Nie Wuxiang thought for a moment then nodded. "What you said makes sense. All right, let's talk about our relationship first." Mo Tiange always felt that the Nie Wuxiang in front of her was different from the one she met on Demonic Mountain, and even more different from the one she met at the sect more than 60 years ago. Although the previous Nie Wuxiang had a delicate appearance, she looked vicious and had a strange character. However, the one in front of her was obviously a lot more relaxed, and her whole body was full of a kind of lively aura. Perhaps it was because she left Master Song Feng? She couldn't help but have this thought. This wasn't impossible. When they met on Demonic Mountain, Nie Wuxiang's behavior was very clear. Master Song Feng beat and scolded this disciple at every turn, and Nie Wuxiang also revealed feelings of fear and hatred towards her master. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tiange's mind was moved. Nie Wuxiang just said she obtained a treasure from Master Song Feng, which was why she could leave the Celestial Pole and come to Yunzhong. This sounded a bit strange. To be able to cross the South Sea by relying on this treasure must have great magical powers. Based on Master Song Feng's attitude towards her, it was impossible for him to give her such a magic treasure, right? Was it possible that she stole Master Song Feng's magic treasure and secretly escaped? Chapter 352. Seeing Mo Tiange staring at her like that, Nie Wuxiang was bewildered and looked down at herself. "What's wrong?" Mo Tiange smiled and went straight to the point. "Did you escape?" Nie Wuxiang's expression darkened in an instant, and she clenched her fists. Mo Tiange glanced at her hand and said, "Don't forget you were in my formation." Nie Wuxiang was startled and relaxed. After a while, she finally said, "Yes, I betrayed my master, stole his treasured magic weapon and fled the Celestial Pole." At this point, she stared at Mo Tiange. "Are you happy now?" After confirming her guess, Mo Tiange finally felt like a huge rock had been lifted from her heart. The enmity between her and Nie Wuxiang was because of Master Song Feng. If she left Master Song Feng, the two of them wouldn't be enemies. She smiled and looked at Nie Wuxiang. "Yes, I'm very happy. Aren't you happy?" Such calmness stunned Nie Wuxiang. She stared at Mo Tiange with complicated feelings. She remembered the first time she saw her. She was only in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. As Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple, she received female guests at Lord Daoist Xuanin's soul formation ceremony. At that time, she knew her master was going to Xianxing school to cause trouble for Lord Daoist Jinghe, so she paid special attention to this Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple. She thought she was obviously a proud child, but she had to pretend to be indifferent, which made people hate her. She admitted she was jealous at that time, and because of that, she couldn't help but hate her. The next time she met her was several decades later. At that time, She had just advanced to the core formation realm and followed her master to Demonic Mountain. At that time, Master Daoist Qingwei already had a small reputation. When she traveled around Kunwu, she occasionally heard people talk about how Lord Daoist Jinghe of Xianxia School accepted another genius disciple who advanced to the core formation realm within 100 years. Her initial jealousy was gradually forgotten after several decades, but when she met her again, she still couldn't control herself from hating her. Why was she so lucky as a woman? She had a master who loved his disciple as much as his own life and a senior martial brother who cherished her so much. As for herself, she had nothing. Seeing how perfect she was, she hated herself for her imperfections. However, when her master wanted to destroy this perfection and let the three of them taste the disgusting taste of swallowing a fly, she couldn't bear it anymore. Therefore, she tampered with the order and even went back to stop it when her master was rushing to Jade Palace. She couldn't figure out why she would do that. Perhaps it was because of her perfection that he had a longing for her, so he couldn't bear to destroy her? Or perhaps, as a woman, such a thing was too cruel, so cruel that even she couldn't accept it. It was no longer necessary to investigate the reason. By the time she reacted, she had already done so. Then, when her master went to Jade Palace, she left Demonic Mountain almost as if she was fleeing for her life. She was very afraid. She was afraid of how her master would punish her if he knew that she had done such a thing. Would he be so angry that he would slap her to death? Or should he trap her in the original devil pool and make her suffer a fate worse than death? But even though she was so scared that she could hardly control herself, she never regretted it. Who would have thought that a change would occur on Demonic Mountain and she would escape a calamity instead? Although her master fled in disarray, he was seriously injured and didn't know what she had done. In the following 10 years, her master had been in closed-door meditation to heal his injuries and had no time to pay attention to her. She was relieved for the time being, but she was still concerned about this matter. Her master would find out sooner or later. When he found out, she would be lucky if she could be slapped to death by him. She didn't want to die and wanted to live a better life, so her desire to escape became more and more urgent day by day. Her master was seriously injured and had no time to care about her. Was there a better time than now? She planned for a long time and finally made up her mind. She decided to go all the way and steal her master's magic weapon while he was healing his injuries and fled the celestial pole. From that moment on, she had no late-stage nascent soul master and no backer. However, she had freedom, the freedom she yearned for day and night. Crossing the South Sea and escaping from the celestial pole was a dangerous move for her. She knew better than anyone else about her master's vengeful personality. Since she had betrayed her master, there was no way out. If she was caught by him, she would be in a state worse than death. That being the case, she might as well risk it. Even if she died in the South Sea, it would be better than the rest of her life. Fortunately, after letting her down for more than 100 years, God finally gave her hope this time, allowing her to cross the South Sea and safely arrive at Yunzhong's North Pole Island. But she never expected that she would meet Master Daoist Qingwei here again. Before leaving the Celestial Pole, she learned that her senior martial brother had succeeded in forming his nascent soul and the two of them had become dual cultivation Dao companions. According to reason, shouldn't they be inseparable at this time? Why were they separated and came to Yunzhong thousands of miles away by themselves? She felt very confused. She suddenly realized she couldn't understand this God's favored one. Emotienga raised her eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong?" She didn't speak for a long time. Nie Wuxiang withdrew her gaze and said faintly, "Nothing. I just suddenly realized I don't seem to understand you." Emotienga frowned. She didn't quite understand what Nie Wuxiang meant. In the next moment, Nie Wuxiang smiled. "Forget it. Let's not talk about these things. Let's continue to discuss our relationship." Emotienga waved her hand. "Since you've left your master, even if we're not friends, we won't be enemies. Of course, as long as you're not hostile." Nie Wuxiang stared at her, her gaze becoming complicated again. You also saved me." She smiled. "In any case, you were the one who stopped that matter in the end. I didn't have a chance back then, so I have to thank you now." Nie Wuxiang's gaze moved. It could be said that the reason she was sitting here today was directly caused by this matter. If she hadn't saved Imotienga, she wouldn't have chosen to escape out of fear of her master's punishment, and she wouldn't have taken the risk to cross the South Sea and come to North Pole Island. Why are you thanking me? If I hadn't taken master there, you wouldn't have. Imotienga just smiled. Not long after you left, you brought your master back. Presumably, your master was nearby, right? With his divine sense as the first late-stage nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole, I'm afraid he'd have discovered us long ago. Of course, it's not that I don't care at all. It's just that the enmity between you and me is all because of your master. Since you've already left him, there's no need to mention it again. Nie Wuxiang's expression was complicated. She stared at her for a long time before she finally said, "That day, it wasn't me who took my master there. As soon as we came out of the fog, we were discovered by him." Imotienga wasn't surprised to hear this. She just nodded lightly. I see. Judging from Nie Wuxiang's attitude this time, Imotienga already guessed that Nie Wuxiang wasn't hostile towards her. That was for the best. Imotienga didn't want to be enemies with Nie Wuxiang. The two of them were silent for a long time before Imotienga asked, "Do you have anything else to say?" Nie Wuxiang shook her head, hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You don't have to worry about Tianyan's sect implicating you. I don't think they can discover me, even if they're nascent soul cultivators." "You're that confident?" Imotienga was a bit surprised. In fact, she wasn't afraid of being implicated. Her unique formation wasn't a common one. Even a nascent soul cultivator's divine sense would be blocked outside. Nie Wuxiang curled her lips into a proud smile. "My concealment technique has never failed. Otherwise, how could I dare to steal things from Tianyan's sect?" That was true. Without Master Songfeng, she was only an early-stage core formation cultivator now. How could she fight against Tianyan's sect, which had two nascent soul cultivators? Since she dared to do it, she naturally had something to rely on. Imotienga thought for a moment, then asked, "Why did you want to steal things from Tianyan's sect?" Upon seeing Nie Wuxiang's hesitant expression, Imotienga added, "I'm just asking. If you don't want to answer, you don't have to." "There's nothing I can't say." Nie Wuxiang revealed a bitter smile. She lowered her head to look at her gloved hands and said softly, "You should know what kind of cultivator my master is, right?" Imotienga didn't answer. She didn't understand what Nie Wuxiang meant. Nie Wuxiang sighed, then continued to say, "What the celestial pole says is correct. He's indeed neither a human nor a ghost, neither a Daoist nor a devil. He can't be considered a real person at all. Although what I practice isn't his main cultivation technique, what kind of good things could he possibly teach me? I'm a martial cultivator, yet I've almost reached my current level without any bottlenecks in just over 100 years because he used his own primordial devil aura to open up all my meridians." At this point, she saw Imotienga's shocked expression, so her smile became even more bitter. "Correct. From another perspective, I'm also not a pure person. Every once in a while, the primordial devil aura in my body will flare up. At that time, I'd rather die than live." Imotienga sucked in a breath of cold air when she heard this. She really didn't expect Master Songfeng to treat his disciple like this. "Is the thing you stole from Tianyan's sect related to this?" "Correct." Nie Wuxiang was still staring at her hand in a daze. "Since I left Master, I wanted to live like a human. After I arrived on North Pole Island, I inquired everywhere for a way to eliminate the primordial devil aura. Finally, I heard that Tianyan's sect had a treasure." At this point, she looked up at Imotienga and revealed a mocking smile. "Everyone says Yunzhong cultivators are more powerful than celestial pole cultivators. In my opinion, it's just that the way they fight is a bit strange. They can't be considered powerful." Imotienga was silent. Nie Wuxiang was a martial cultivator, so her way of fighting was very different from Dao cultivators. The two main characteristics of Yunzhong cultivators in fights of magical powers, speed and control of spiritual aura, were useless against her, so it was no wonder she said that. "Then what's next?" Imotienga asked, "How long are you going to hide here?" Nie Wuxiang said indifferently, "It won't be too long. that group of idiots won't be able to find me. 3 days later, I'll disguise myself as a cultivator going out to sea and leave North Pole Island. She stared at Imotienga, her gaze flickering. Of course, if you're still afraid I'll implicate you, I can also leave. Imotienga stared at her, raised her eyebrows and smiled. What? You want to provoke me to help you? Nie Wuxiang was stunned, but she soon smiled helplessly. All right, we're not enemies now, but we're not friends either. I just want to stay here. If you want to drive me away, I can't do anything about it, but if you don't, I won't leave. Chapter 353. Nie Wuxiang looked very calm, as if she wasn't worried about being captured by Tianyan's sect at all. Imotienga stared at her for a while, then suddenly asked, "Did you notice me that day in Jade Qilin Pavilion?" The smile on Nie Wuxiang's face froze and she stared at her. "Do you want to ask if I led them to chase you?" "You can say that," Imotienga admitted frankly. She was naturally suspicious. Since she wasn't going to be enemies with Nie Wuxiang, it would always be a thorn in her heart if she didn't clarify this matter. No. Imotienga breathed a sigh of relief when she heard Nie Wuxiang's answer. She then asked, "Then when did you notice me?" "It was also around that time." Nie Wuxiang said, "That day, I left the Jade Qilin Pavilion and hid my tracks. Who would have thought those Tianyan sect cultivators would chase after you? I followed them out of curiosity and found out it was actually you. Furthermore, you're also living here, just like me." Nie Wuxiang also felt this matter was inconceivable. She originally thought she and Imotienga walked two completely different paths. Now that Imotienga had a Dao companion to accompany her in her cultivation, she should be proud of herself in the celestial pole. She didn't expect Imotienga would escape in a sorry state just like her and arrive in Yunzhong thousands of miles away. Imotienga stared at her for a long time, making Nie Wuxiang feel strange. She then asked, "Why are you pestering me? With fellow Daoist Nie's personality, don't you prefer to be alone?" The smile on Nie Wuxiang's face suddenly disappeared. She stared at Imotienga silently for a long time before she said, "Can I not answer?" Imotienga gave her a deep look then nodded. "Up to you." She straightened her body, brushed her sleeves, then sat down on her praying mat. "If you want to stay here, I won't drive you away. You can do as you please." Nie Wuxiang watched as Imotienga closed her eyes and began to meditate, no longer prepared to pay attention to her. She then looked down at her gloved hands and suddenly felt very confused. After so many years, she finally escaped. But how could she continue on this path? She couldn't help but look at Imotienga, who was meditating with her eyes closed and seemed completely defenseless against her. Could this person give her an answer? Imotienga opened her eyes and stared at Nie Wuxiang, who was cultivating freely in the corner. She couldn't help but smirk. The reason she let Nie Wuxiang stay here without worry was naturally because she had confidence in her unique formation. As long as Nie Wuxiang made any strange movements, she could instantly kill her. However, from the looks of it now, Nie Wuxiang really didn't have any hostility towards her. In fact, it could even be said that she was a bit too close to her. How could ordinary people cultivate in the same room as other cultivators? Even if they were friends, it was rare for them to be so close. Unless it was a matter of life and death, cultivators would never be willing to let others see them while they were cultivating. Because she had the formation to rely on, Nie Wuxiang's life and death were basically in her hands, which was why she dared to cultivate in front of her without any scruples. What was the reason for Nie Wuxiang's death? He dared to enter her heavily restricted cultivation room, dared to drink her tea, and even dared to cultivate in front of her. She was Master Song Feng's disciple, so she should be very vigilant. Why did she trust her so much? This kind of feeling made Imotienga feel very strange. It wasn't that she didn't have friends. Xianxing School's Luo Fengxue, Yi Jingwen, and the others could all be considered her good friends for many years. However, they were fellow disciples of the same sect, so their temperaments could also be considered congenial. But what about Nie Wuxiang? Nie Wuxiang's character and experience were worlds apart from hers. There was practically no similarity between them. She was Master Songfang's disciple, so presumably, she never lacked spirit stones or medicinal pills. However, she was casually beaten and scolded by her own master, so she almost had no self-respect at all. Would a person like her easily trust others? As for Mo Tiange herself, although she wandered from place to place when she was young and lacked medicinal pills, second uncle still gave her meticulous care. After losing second uncle, she got her master, Qin Shi, and some friends. It was precisely because of this kind of experience that although she developed a suspicious and cautious personality, she would also trust others and believe in the truth. She and Ye Wuxiang were basically two different kinds of people. What was even more strange was that, according to reason, she didn't reject trusting others, and Ye Wuxiang had saved her before, so it was normal for her to have a certain amount of goodwill towards Ye Wuxiang. However, based on Ye Wuxiang's experience growing up, she should be wary of her. Why did she seem more at ease than Mo Tiange? Mo Tiange felt she couldn't guess Ye Wuxiang's thoughts at all. She had never met someone like Ye Wuxiang, but this Ye Wuxiang couldn't be deduced with common sense. Why are you looking at me? Ye Wuxiang suddenly opened her eyes. Mo Tiange showed a faint smile and said calmly, I'm wondering what you're thinking in the end. Ye Wuxiang was stunned, but she soon revealed a faint smile and said, Then why don't you just ask? But you didn't answer me before. Mo Tiange stared at her and said, I really don't understand why you trust me so much. Ye Wuxiang hung her head and was silent for a long time before she finally said, I don't know. Maybe after leaving Master, I just want to try living another kind of life. Even if that's the case, why did it have to be me? Aren't you afraid I'll attack you for cultivating in my place without any vigilance? Ye Wuxiang chuckled at this question and raised her head to look at Mo Tiange. Just take it as my intuition that you can trust me. Mo Tiange was silent and didn't say anything else. Ye Wuxiang sighed softly, then closed her eyes again, hiding the loneliness in them. In fact, she still didn't say the real reason. Ever since she was a child, she had always dreamed of escaping that terrifying master and living a new life. But when she realized her dream, she found herself at a loss. How could she be considered a person if she lived like a person? She wanted to walk under the sun, talk and laugh with others, have a strong heart, and be willing to trust others. But now, her primordial devil aura was hidden deep in her meridians, so she still couldn't be considered a person. In the past year, she restrained her spiritual breath and hid in this inn, looking for a way to dissolve the primordial devil aura while thinking about what she should do next. After so many years, she already didn't know how to interact with people. How could she start the life she wanted? At this time, she saw Mo Tiange again, the person she envied and felt ashamed of. She suddenly thought that maybe this was her beginning. This was a rare, old friend who knew her background and didn't need to explain anything. Most importantly, Mo Tiange saved her, so she could gamble on whether there was goodwill between them, or even whether a friendship could be established. What if Mo Tiange didn't trust her? She thought about this problem. At that time, a deep sense of fatigue welled up in her heart. If that was the case, then just disappear. She laughed at herself for having such a world-hating idea. She escaped from the celestial pole with untold hardships and narrowly escaped death, but in the end, she put her life in someone else's hands. However, she didn't want to change her decision. For so many years, she had never controlled her own fate, so she was still at a loss even after breaking free from the shackles. That being the case, what if she let someone else decide for once? Now it seemed she had won the gamble. Mo Tiange didn't want to be her enemy. This made her feel a little meaning in life. Her life wasn't a failure. At least there was someone willing to accept her trust. Thinking of this, she suddenly felt a little hope in her loneliness. This kind of new beginning wasn't bad. 3 days later, Ye Wuxiang stopped cultivating and looked at the bright window. You're leaving? Mo Tiange opened her eyes and looked at her. Ye Wuxiang didn't turn her head and just answered, It's time. Mo Tiange thought for a while and finally asked, Do you have a surefire way to leave? Ye Wuxiang turned to look at her and said, Are you leaving or not? Mo Tiange was stunned for a moment, then she said with a smile, If I go with you, does that mean I'm really your accomplice? Nie Wuxiang shrugged and said indifferently, "Are you still worried about being implicated by me? I can't afford to provoke two nascent soul cultivators," Mo Tiange said faintly. "But I can't escape responsibility for this matter, so I'd better leave North Pole Island as soon as possible." Nie Wuxiang smiled. "So, you also plan to leave today?" Mo Tiange smiled without answering. Nie Wuxiang didn't say much. She began to disguise herself in front of Mo Tiange. She took out a bunch of strange things from her Qinkuan bag and started to wipe her face. All kinds of powdery things were smeared on her face. Some were red, some were yellow, and some were yellow. When she finished, her face became a strange waxy yellow. Then she added a mole, trimmed her eyebrows, and stuck a beard on her face. When she finished, she tied up her hair again, changed her clothes, and immediately turned into a skinny man. Mo Tiange saw her transformation with her own eyes, so she was very curious. "You're the secular world's disguise technique." Nie Wuxiang put away the things on the table, picked up a powder box, and shook it in front of her. "Do you want it?" Mo Tiange shook her head and looked at her carefully. She couldn't see any flaws, so she couldn't help but sigh. This is a good method. High-level cultivators can easily see through disguise technique, but the secular world's disguise technique can only be distinguished by eyesight. It's useless no matter how high your cultivation level is. It was also because of this reason that she disguised herself as a man when she entered Yunwu sect. Cultivators possessed magic power, so they often relied on their divine sense and neglected the most fundamental problem of disguise. However, Nie Wuxiang's methods were much more brilliant than hers. She almost became a different person. "I'm leaving." After putting away the things, Nie Wuxiang looked up at her. "Thank you for taking me in this time." Mo Tiange smiled and didn't stand on ceremony. She asked, "What's your plan after leaving North Pole Island?" "Naturally, I'm going to Yunzhong's inland," Nie Wuxiang said. North Pole Island's transporting formation has something to do with Tianyan sect, so it's not convenient for me to use it. I can only disguise myself as a cultivator going out to sea and fly there directly. I'll probably go to Eastern Tang first. At that time, I hope we'll be fated to meet again. Mo Tiange nodded. Since she crossed the South Sea and came to Yunzhong, she could naturally fly directly from North Pole Island to Yunzhong's inland. She didn't need to worry about this at all. "All right, we'll meet again in the future." Nie Wuxiang sighed then smiled. She took out a bamboo hat from inside her robe and put it on her head. After Mo Tiange opened the restriction, she pushed the door open and walked out. Soon, she disappeared without a sound. Mo Tiange stared at the place she left, silent for a long time. Chapter 354. Not long after Nie Wuxiang left, Mo Tiange stood up and put away her things. Although Nie Wuxiang had left, there were two nascent soul cultivators in Tianyan sect. What if they had some divine ability they didn't know about and found out? She might as well leave now before Tianyan sect suspected her. She entered the virtual sky world, put Xiaohua and Xiaofan into the spiritual beast bag, put away her magic weapons and other things one by one, and finally removed the formation of the cultivation room. Ayin. Upon hearing her voice, Ayin, who was watering the flowers outside the room, ran over. Nie Wuxiang left in front of her just now, but she didn't notice at all. "Fairy, what's your order?" "I'm leaving," Mo Tiange said gently. She took out several spirit stones from her robe and gave them to her. "These days you've served me very well. These spirit stones are your reward. I've already paid enough for the room. After I leave, you just need to report to the shopkeeper." Ayin was stunned. "Fairy, you're leaving so soon. I've comprehended some profound principles during my cultivation these days, so I have to go back to inland Yunzhong first. We'll meet again if fate wills it." Mo Tiange said goodbye to her with a smile then left the small courtyard. "Fairy!" Ayin chased after her with the spirit stones in her hands. She wanted to thank her, but she found that there was no one outside the courtyard. She sighed regretfully and turned back silently. As a maid in this inn, she rarely met cultivators who were so easy to serve. She even gave her a lot of spirit stones before she left. She didn't know if she would have the chance to see her again in the future, After leaving the inn, Tiange walked towards the free market. She had already inquired about the transporting formations to leave North Pole Island. There were several transporting formations on North Pole Island, and most of them were controlled by cultivation sections. Even if they didn't belong to any sect in name, they were more or less related to those sections. In other words, no matter which transporting formation she took, it was impossible to avoid Tianyan sect. Therefore, Tiange chose the transporting formation belonging to Tianyan sect in the free market. Since she couldn't avoid it, she'd just borrow the one belonging to Tianyan sect. Nie Wuxiang had already left. As long as she didn't show the slightest bit of guilt, Tianyan sect presumably wouldn't notice anything. He went to the Jade Qilin Pavilion with familiarity and greeted the cultivator who came to receive him. Then, with the guidance of the cultivator, he arrived at another hall where people were coming and going. This hall was much smaller than the one in the free market, and there were far fewer people here. After all, the teleportation fee wasn't cheap. Low-level cultivators often had to save up for a long time before they could even afford a single teleportation. As soon as Tiange entered the hall, she sensed a cultivator's divine sense sweeping past her body. In a split second, her fine hairs stood on end. She unconsciously became vigilant, because this divine sense belonged to a nascent soul cultivator. Tianyan sect's nascent soul cultivators had really set out? Tiange was rather astonished. What exactly did Nie Wuxiang steal? Since it was placed in the Jade Qilin Pavilion, it shouldn't be important enough for a nascent soul cultivator to come out and search for it, right? Although Tiange had a lot of questions in her heart, her expression didn't change. Like the other cultivators, she walked to the transporting formation to register. Upon seeing that she was a core formation cultivator, the aura refining disciple in charge of registration respectfully asked her to wait on the side. The several foundation building cultivators who were in charge of the formation, however, stared at her with vigilance as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Tiange showed a faint smile and pretended she didn't feel anything. While waiting, she leisurely sipped her tea. Tianyan sect seemed to be quite wealthy. The tea leaves served to guests in Jade Qilin Pavilion were unexpectedly so rich in spiritual aura. After a while, someone hurriedly came out of the inner wing and walked towards her. Tiange raised her head to look and smiled. What a coincidence! It was unexpectedly that Madame Chizu again. Upon seeing her, Madame Chizu also smiled without saying anything. The two of them greeted each other with great tacit understanding. Fellow Daoist Chizu. Fellow Daoist Qingwei. After greeting each other, Madame Chizu asked with a smile, Fellow Daoist Qingwei, are you leaving North Pole Island? Why don't you stay for a few more days? Tiange answered with a smile, I suddenly had an epiphany while cultivating recently, so I need to go back to inland Yunzhong as soon as possible. Fated chances wait for no man. Although I haven't strolled around North Pole Island enough, I have no choice but to leave. I see. No cultivator would doubt this reason. For cultivators, nothing was more important than fated chances. Tiange looked around then asked with a hint of curiosity, Fellow Daoist Chizu, could it be that you still haven't found that thief? Although there were no core formation cultivators at the scene, these foundation building cultivators nervously checked the cultivators who left. There were also nascent soul cultivators overseeing the scene. Once they found a core formation cultivator, Madame Chizu even came out to personally check. This was an extraordinarily grand display. Tiange couldn't help but worry. Although Nie Wuxiang was only disguised as a cultivator who went to sea, presumably, they also checked her, right? She wondered if she passed. Madame Chizu smiled helplessly. Yes, my nascent soul martial uncle from my sect ordered us to carefully check all the cultivators who left North Pole Island during this period of time. Fellow Daoist Qingwei, you don't mind, right? Tiange was worried, but her expression was indifferent. She said, Fellow Daoist, please go ahead and check. I just hope you can let me leave as soon as possible. If I miss this fated chance, I don't know when the next one will be. That's natural. Madame Chizu readily agreed then said, Fellow Daoist Qingwei please. Tiange stood up and followed Madame Chizu into an empty wing room. Madame Chizu took out a jade plate, circled Tienge, and carefully examined it twice. In the end, she heaved a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "All right, fellow Daoist can go and handle the formalities." Upon hearing this, Tienge's tense nerves relaxed. She felt the divine sense entangling her finally dissipate. She still had the same expression on her face as she cupped her hands and bowed to Madame Chizu. "Fellow Daoist Chizu, I'll take my leave now. Until we meet again." "Until we meet again. It's really not a good time for me to meet fellow Daoist. My sect just happened to have a major event. If fellow Daoist comes to North Pole Island again in the future, I'll play the role of a host." Madame Chizu walked her to the transporting formation and told the disciple guarding it to waive her teleportation fee. The two of them exchanged pleasantries again before they formally said their goodbyes. With Madame Chizu's permission, the attitude of the several foundation building cultivators guarding the transporting formation immediately became much more polite. They asked respectfully, "May I know where Senior wants to be teleported to?" Tienge smiled and asked, "How many places can your transporting formation teleport to?" "Senior, our transporting formation teleports to 3 places: Eastern Tang State, Southern Zhou State, and Northern Lin State." Tienge said, "To Eastern Tang State. Is it directly teleported to the capital?" The foundation building cultivator spread the map and pointed at Eastern Tang State. "Senior, please take a look. Our teleportation location is here. It's called Sky Snow City." "Here?" Tienge mumbled, "It seems a bit far." The foundation building cultivator showed an apologetic expression. "The capital is too far, and the teleportation fee is too high. However, there's also a transporting formation in Sky Snow City, so it should be very convenient for Senior to return to the sect." Tienge knew he misunderstood, but she didn't explain. It would be advantageous for her if others thought she was a cultivator from Eastern Tang State. If they knew she came from the distant celestial pole, who knew whether someone would want to get something from her out of curiosity? She nodded. "All right, Sky Snow City it is." Chapter 355. This was a city located in the northern part of Yunzhong. The snow-white city walls were made of a special kind of white stone. The rows of buildings in the city were all made of stone without exception. Under the clear blue sky, there was a city that was as white as snow. The white was distinct, and the blue was clear. Looking at the beautiful scene in front of her, Tienge couldn't help but sigh. No wonder this city was called Sky Snow City. The blue sky and white snow really lived up to its name. "Senior, do you want a map?" A detailed map of Sky Snow City, including all cultivators' Immortal's caves that can be rented and the market square's location. "Senior, are you looking for someone or traveling? Do you need a guide?" "Senior." As soon as she came out of the transporting formation, Tienge was surrounded by a group of people who introduced her to various things. There were many cultivators coming and going. Although most of them were aura-refining cultivators, it still made her sigh. Yunzhong was indeed a holy land for cultivation. It wasn't like a cultivation city like Kuanzhong City, which also had such an atmosphere. In the end, she just bought a map of Sky Snow City and sent the others away. Although Sky Snow City wasn't the capital of Eastern Tang, it was still a big city. According to the map, this city had a history of more than 10,000 years. Because there was a white stone mountain nearby, the city was built with mountain stones. The city was like snow, so it was called Sky Snow City. It was said that the white stones of Sky Snow City were extremely hard, like jade, and had the function of gathering spiritual aura. Although they were far inferior to spirit stones, they were better than nothing. Therefore, there were many middle and low-level cultivators living in this city. They called the white stones white spirit stones and jokingly called the houses they lived in spirit stone houses, which was very interesting. At the same time, Tienge also discovered that Sky Snow City itself had a medium-sized spirit vein. Coupled with the function of white spirit stones, although it wasn't enough to build a sect, it was a blessed land for many individual cultivators. It was no wonder that so many individual cultivators gathered in this city. After leaving Tianyensek Station, Tiange thought for a moment and decided to find a place to stay first. Among the 5 great sects of Eastern Tang, Wuxing Valley was remote, Pufa School was in the west, Jingshu School was near the capital, Danxia sect was in the north, and Jilyan sect happened to be not far from Sky Snow City. Tiange's primary purpose in coming to Yunzhong was to travel. Her secondary purpose was to go to Danxia sect to investigate and find traces of Yaoqing as well as the complete art of Sunu. However, Danxia sect was, after all, a great cultivation group in Yunzhong, and Yaoqing was a traitor, so it was unwise to ask her directly. Before he could finish, the big man with the beard reprimanded him. "We stopped this robbery because we had no other choice. It's fine if we get the money. Have you forgotten the commandments?" "Commandments?" The wretched man snorted disdainfully. He was very dissatisfied. "Big brother, have you forgotten that we've been driven out? We're individual cultivators now. What does the commandments have to do with us?" The big man with the beard's eyes flashed. He then said with a heavy voice, "Whether we've been driven out or not, we still want to continue cultivating, so we can't forget the commandments. Aren't you afraid of the inner demon of core formation?" Upon hearing this, the wretched man was finally persuaded. He said reluctantly, "Oh, okay, I understand." Right after he finished speaking, he saw Tiange struggling in the golden net. He squinted his eyes and teased her with a smile. "Miss, don't struggle anymore. This is an inescapable net, a magic weapon. Although your cultivation level is higher than ours, once you're trapped in the inescapable net, you'll still be trampled on." Tiange stopped struggling and stared coldly at the 2 men. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" The wretched man stroked his mustache and stared at Tiange's face with a covetous gaze. "Hand over your Qianquan bag." Tiange didn't move. She just stared at them. Seeing that she didn't move for a long time, the wretched man became impatient. He pulled the knot in the net and said, "Hurry up or I'll also rob you." "Junior Marshal brother." Right after he finished speaking, the big man with the beard shouted and stared at him with raised eyebrows. Under his gaze, the wretched man became weak and muttered, "Okay, I understand." The big man with the beard looked at Tiange and said gently, "Fellow Daoist, Junior Marshal brother and I have no choice but to do this shady business. I can guarantee we won't hurt you." Tiange stared at the big man with the beard and sneered. "What's the difference between wanting my Qianquan bag and wanting my life? For cultivators, don't tell me you don't know the importance of a Qianquan bag?" The big man with the beard was speechless. After a while, he finally said, "Then you just need to hand over some spirit stones." Tiange stared at him and couldn't help but narrow her eyes. "I only want spirit stones. Aren't you afraid I'll kill you after you let me go?" The big man with the beard shook his head. "We have our own ways. Big brother, why are you talking to her so much? In any case, we've already done it." The wretched man couldn't wait to interrupt their conversation. He stared at Tiange with an ominous glint in his eyes. "My big brother is easy to talk to, but I'm not. If you don't hand over the spirit stones, I'll give you a bit of suffering." As he spoke, he pulled the knot in his hand. Tiange wrinkled her brows. She felt pain in the places covered by the golden net. She was a bit surprised. Marshal Uncle Zhenyang said most cultivators in Yunzhong had magic weapons that could control spiritual aura. She didn't expect that these 2 foundation-building cultivators would also have magic weapons that could control spiritual aura. "Junior Marshal brother." The big man with the beard shouted again. "Big brother." The wretched man said unhappily, "Since we've already decided to do this, why should we be afraid of the slightest thing? What's the point of doing this?" The big man with the beard's eyes dimmed. He lowered his head and said nothing. Tiange's gaze shifted to the 2 of them and she asked, "Why did you 2 set up an ambush here? Isn't this the way to Ling clan? Presumably, there should be a lot of people here. Aren't you afraid of being bumped into by others?" This was exactly what puzzled her. She'd been trapped here for so long, but no one had come. Ling clan? Ha! Upon hearing her question, the wretched man laughed triumphantly and said, "There are so many idiots in this world. Who said this road leads to Ling clan? Tiange wrinkled her brows and said slowly, that map is fake? You're still too stupid. The wretched man smiled until his eyes narrowed. This idea isn't bad, right? A fat sheep that just arrived in Sky Snow City, a lone cultivator, as long as we tamper with the map a bit, will naturally come here. Tiange's expression darkened. You, quickly hand over your Qinkuan bag. The wretched man lost his patience and shouted, if you don't hand it over, I won't be polite. Be polite? I'd like to see how you're going to be rude. Under their gazes, Tiange waved her sleeves. The spiritual aura in her body surged, and the momentum of a core formation cultivator instantly spread. The golden net covering her body fluttered without any wind. The big man with the beard was shocked and shouted, you're in the core formation realm. The wretched man was stunned for a moment, then he hastily made a hand seal, trying to retract the golden net. Tiange snorted coldly and gently raised her hand. The wretched man immediately felt a strong pressure coming from the other side. His face instantly turned red and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Senior! The big man with the beard shouted. He didn't dare to step forward and took out his Qinkuan bag. Senior, please let go of my junior martial brother. I'm willing to offer all my belongings to you. Tiange cast a glance at the big man. He was actually smart. He knew he couldn't resist and immediately begged for mercy. Unfortunately, it was too late. Tiange only glanced at him once, then withdrew her gaze. Under the surging spiritual aura, her sleeves fluttered even though there was no wind. She opened and closed her right palm. The wretched man let out an ah, and could only watch helplessly as the golden net in his hand was taken by her. The wretched man was so shocked that he couldn't react. Tiange was angry at his frivolous words just now, so she didn't show any mercy. She gathered spiritual aura in her hand and struck him. Ah! With a blood-curdling scream, the wretched man was sent flying and crashed into a rock. His head tilted to one side and his whole body softly fell to the ground. He was no longer breathing. Junior martial brother. The big man with the beard widened his eyes and threw himself at him. He was stunned when he realized he was no longer breathing. After a while, he suddenly turned to look at Tiange. You, what? Do you want revenge? Tiange raised her eyebrows and asked when she saw the fierce glint in the man's eyes. The man was stunned at first, but soon after his expression turned sorrowful and his whole body softened. A core formation cultivator? He was merely in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. How could he take revenge? Tiange couldn't help but feel strange when she saw the man's appearance. Based on their conversation just now, these two people didn't have the same temperament. Why did they block the road and rob people together? This whole thing was strange. What was going on? Chapter 356. The bearded man hugged his companion and sobbed. Tiange watched as the tall and strong man cried miserably, and the strange feeling in her heart grew stronger. What was the relationship between these two people? Their personalities were obviously very different, but they seemed to be very close to each other, and they even had some kind of commandment. After crying for a while, the man wiped his face dejectedly when he saw Tiange. Senior, if you want to kill us, just kill us. We offended you first, so we can only blame ourselves for not following the commandment and not knowing how to recognize people. Tiange frowned and stared at the man without saying anything. After a while, seeing that she didn't want to attack, the man raised his head and looked at her with puzzled eyes. Senior, are you a Buddhist cultivator? Tiange suddenly asked. There was a flash of hesitation in the big man's eyes. He paused for a moment and finally nodded. Yes, Junior is a Buddhist cultivator, sure enough. In Yunzhong, Buddhist cultivators were different from Dao cultivators. They had stricter commandments. However, she felt it was quite strange. That wretched man was fine, but this man obviously cared about commandments from time to time, so why did he rob passers-by with her? Since you're a Buddhist cultivator, why did you pretend to be a Dao cultivator and rob people here? Am I the first person you robbed? Upon hearing this question, the man fell silent. After a while, he smiled bitterly and said, "Senior, this is my secret, and I'll never tell anyone. You were indeed the first person we robbed. We hired a child to sell maps at the teleportation circle. If we took a fancy to someone, we would ask him to sell the tampered map to that person. Who knew that we would make a mistake at the first time? We really brought this upon ourselves." At this point he sighed dejectedly. "Senior, if you want to kill me, just kill me. I have nothing to say." However, after he closed his eyes and waited for a long time, Emotienga only asked, "Where does the Ling house go?" The man opened his eyes and stared blankly at Emotienga. "You won't kill me?" Emotienga looked at him calmly and repeated, "Where does the Ling house go?" "Over there." He pointed at the road on the right in a daze. Emotienga nodded, then turned around and walked away. "Senior," the man shouted behind her. Emotienga stopped and her gaze turned cold. "What? Do you want me to kill you?" The burly man hurriedly shook his head and said, "That inescapable net." Emotienga couldn't help but laugh. "Could it be that you still want to go back?" The burly man was silent. He knew that this was just wishful thinking. They blocked the road and robbed a core formation senior. It was already good enough that the senior didn't kill them. How could they possibly return the magic treasure to him? It was just that if he lost his life, then it would have been fine. He wouldn't have thought about anything else. But now, his junior brother was dead, and the heaven and earth net was lost, but he was left with his life. How could he face his master? No, he couldn't continue to be dispirited like this. At the very least, he had to return to Mount Baifu. As he watched Emotienga's departing figure, the burly man's gaze gradually became fervent. Once she was back on the right path, she took out the golden net from her sleeve and examined it carefully. This net was woven from an unknown golden thread. It was exquisite and light as if it was weightless. The spiritual energy attached to it was very strange. It was very different from the spiritual energy of cultivators. Could it be Buddhist energy? After thinking for a while, she shook her head, threw the golden net into her Qiankuan bag, and continued forward. In fact, if she wanted to know the inside story, she could have used the soul-searching technique on that burly man. However, this wasn't a big deal, so it wasn't worth it. For the current her, this was a trivial matter. She hated that wretched man, so she just killed him. If she didn't want to kill the bearded burly man, then she wouldn't kill him. There was no need to think about the consequences. With strength, many problems wouldn't be a problem. After taking the path on the right, a courtyard made of white stones soon appeared in front of him. At the entrance of the courtyard, there were several low-level aura refining cultivators guarding the door. If any cultivators came to visit, they would chat with them. As Emotienga approached, someone immediately came to greet her. "Senior, are you here to rent an immortal's cave?" Emotienga nodded. "Yes." That person immediately said, "Please come with me." Emotienga followed the aura refining cultivator into the courtyard and into a room. This room looked like an ordinary study, similar to Xianxing School's steward's hall. There was a wide table on one side, and a foundation building cultivator was lying motionlessly on the table, holding a wine bottle in his hand. The whole room reeked of alcohol. When the aura refining cultivator who led Emotienga into the room saw her eyebrows twitching unconsciously, he hastily opened the window, then stepped forward to push the seemingly drunk foundation building cultivator. Second uncle." After a while, the cultivator finally moved. Without raising his head, he said with dissatisfaction, "What do you want?" The aura refining cultivator smiled apologetically. "Second uncle, there's a foundation building senior here to rent an immortal's cave." After a while, the cultivator finally reacted. He rubbed his eyes, stretched his body, and shifted his gaze to Emotienga. Seeing that Emotienga was a young woman, the cultivator slightly curbed his arrogance and said, "Fellow Daoist, are you here to rent an immortal's cave?" Emotienga answered calmly. This cultivator from Ling clan looked very young. He looked to be about 30 years old. He had a short beard and a ruddy complexion. Unfortunately, he was too slovenly and looked very sloppy. The cultivator glanced at her, then pointed at the chair across from him. Please sit. Tiange looked at the dark blue Daoist robe at the cuffs of his sleeves, then at the chair. After a moment of hesitation, she cautiously sat down. Upon seeing her expression, the cultivator probably felt embarrassed. His face turned slightly red and he rolled up his sleeves. May I know what kind of Immortal's cave fellow Daoist wants to rent? Tiange said, I'm not familiar with Sky Snow City, so I don't know what's different about the Immortal's cave your manor rents. Fellow Daoist, please tell me. I see. The cultivator nodded, then took a scroll from the table. He then spread it open with his hand. This scroll was extremely large and practically covered the entire table. The shape of a mountain was drawn on it. Obviously, it was a map of White Stone Mountain. Between the mountain rocks, there were many circles drawn. These circles varied in size and color. Some were white, some were blue, some were green, and some were purple. Some were ticked and some weren't. The cultivator from Ling clan said, Our Ling clan's Immortal's cave is divided into 4 kinds according to the spiritual aura. The purple one has the richest spiritual aura, the green one is barely passable, the blue one is slightly worse, and the white one only has a little bit of spiritual aura. The size of the circles indicates the size of the Immortal's cave. A small Immortal's cave only has 3 stone rooms, while a medium-sized Immortal's cave has everything you need. A cultivation room, a spiritual beast room, a pill concocting room, a medicinal garden, whatever you want, you can have it. A large Immortal's cave not only has all these, but it also has a cultivation room for disciples and juniors. As for the price, the bigger the Immortal's cave, the more expensive it is. At this point, the cultivator raised his head and glanced at Tiange. Is fellow Daoist alone? Yes. If fellow Daoist is alone, it doesn't need to be too big. You can choose a small or medium-sized one. Tiange nodded, expressing her agreement. Then what's the price according to the spiritual aura? The cultivator didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, Fellow Daoist, do you want to stay here permanently or temporarily? Tiange thought for a moment, then said, maybe for a few months, maybe for a year or 2. Then it's neither too long nor too short. The cultivator muttered to himself, then said, Fellow Daoist, we rent caves on a daily basis and an annual basis. The daily rent is 3 times higher than the annual rent. If you want to stay for more than 4 months, we'll rent it annually. Otherwise, we'll rent it daily. Tiange thought for a moment, then said, Then we'll rent it annually. The cultivator nodded. According to the medium-sized Immortal's cave, the annual rent is 400 spirit stones for a purple Immortal's cave, 280 spirit stones for a green Immortal's cave, 150 spirit stones for a blue Immortal's cave, and only 30 spirit stones for a white Immortal's cave. He quickly sized up Tiange, then said, Fellow Daoist, you're a foundation building cultivator and your cultivation level is quite high. Not to mention the purple Immortal's cave, I think you should be able to afford the green and blue Immortal's caves. Tiange said, 280 spirit stones a year, 150 spirit stones a year. This price isn't low, right? Even if it was a white Immortal's cave, which cost 30 spirit stones a year, ordinary aura refining cultivators couldn't afford it. Back when she was in Yunwu sect, she only had to pay 5 spirit stones a month. The Ling clan cultivator laughed and said, Fellow Daoist, don't look down on Ling clan's Immortal's cave. Even if it's a white Immortal's cave, it's still much better than other places in Sky Snow City. Coupled with the function of white spirit stones, it's very difficult to find an Immortal's cave like this in other cities. What he said wasn't false. For example, on North Pole Island, the inn's small courtyard cost 1 spirit stone a day, which was equivalent to more than 300 spirit stones a year. Moreover, the spiritual aura there was only average. On her way here, Tiange only felt that although the spirit veins here were also average, when paired with white spirit stones, they could be considered above average. All right, Tiange said, I want a blue Immortal's cave. A small one is fine. How many spirit stones? When the Ling clan cultivator heard this, he glanced at her with slight astonishment, but he didn't say anything. He just answered, 80 spirit stones a year. This price was also affordable for ordinary foundation-building cultivators. Mo Tiange nodded, took out a small bag of spirit stones from her Qinkuan bag, handed it over, and poured it on the table. This is a year's rent. The Ling clan cultivator roughly glanced at it, then flicked his sleeve. In an instant, only a few spirit stones remained on the table. Mo Tiange looked down and was a bit surprised. She didn't count them in detail, she just roughly counted them. This cultivator only glanced at them, but he actually counted them? After receiving the spirit stones, the Ling clan cultivator said, "All right, fellow Daoist, you can see for yourself where you want to live. If there's no tick, it means there's currently no one living there. You can choose whichever you like." Mo Tiange put away the few remaining spirit stones on the table, then lowered her head to look at the scroll. In the end, she chose a small blue circle in the corner. "I'll stay here." The Ling clan cultivator nodded. He gathered spiritual aura on his fingertips and pointed at the small blue circle. The circle shone with a blue light and a tick appeared. Then he took out a jade tablet from his Qinkuan bag, cast a spell on it, and handed it over. "This is the Immortal's cave tablet. Fellow Daoist, keep it well." Mo Tiange took it. "Thank you." The Ling clan cultivator waved his hand and shouted, "Xiaoshun, come here." The low-level cultivator who led Mo Tiange into the Immortal's cave hurriedly ran inside. "Second uncle." The cultivator pointed at Mo Tiange. "Take her to Immortal's cave number 23. The low-level cultivator turned to Mo Tiange. "Senior, please." When Mo Tiange walked out of the room, she couldn't help but shake her head when she saw the Ling clan cultivator holding the wine bottle again. There were actually cultivators in this world who loved wine so much. After she walked far away, the Ling clan cultivator held the wine bottle, rubbed his nose, and said to himself, "He has so many treasures, but he only lives in a blue Immortal's cave, and it's even a small one. He's really stingy." Chapter 357. Mo Tiange didn't hear what the Ling family cultivator said. If she knew, she would definitely be shocked by the sharpness of this person's gaze and be very vigilant. Although she had a lot of magic weapons, they were all properly stored in her Qinkuan bag. She only wore a pair of cloud-treading boots. The cloud-treading boots weren't magic weapons that exposed spiritual aura, so very few people noticed them at first glance. However, this Ling family cultivator said, "A lot of treasures," but she didn't know how he saw it. Not to mention this Ling family cultivator, Mo Tiange smoothly arrived at mysterious cave number 23 under the guidance of the aura-refining cultivator, Xiaoshun. After verifying that there were no mistakes, the aura-refining cultivator excused himself and left. Mo Tiange entered the blue aura Immortal's cave and carefully examined it. There was a formation laid inside the cave. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary forbidding formation, but in fact, there was a secret spying restriction hidden inside. Ling family was a great cultivation clan belonging to Juyen sect. In Sky Snow City, their word was law. It wasn't strange for this kind of cultivation clan with absolute power to play some tricks. In any case, the people renting their Immortal's caves were individual cultivators, so they generally wouldn't discover this restriction. Even if they did, they could only swallow their anger and couldn't argue with them. Because of that, Mo Tiange only used some tricks to erase this prying restriction. Then, she laid her own formation to replace Ling family's formation. She entered the virtual sky world and released Xiaohua and Xiaofan to let them cultivate on their own. Just as she was about to take out the magic weapons and continue refining them, Xiaohua, who had just released the spiritual beast bag, rushed in and suddenly bit Mo Tiange's sleeve, pulling her outside. "What's wrong?" Mo Tiange was puzzled when she sensed Xiaohua's anxiety. Xiaohua naturally wouldn't answer. It just bit her sleeve and ran outside. Mo Tiange followed it out of the cultivation room and ran towards the spiritual beast room. Xiaohua slammed the door with its paw and rushed in first. Mo Tiange was shocked as soon as she entered. She saw Feifei lying on the ground, motionless. Its originally golden fur had dimmed a lot. How could this be? She rushed forward and picked Feifei up. She discovered that its spiritual aura was very weak and its body was ice cold. Although Feifei's cultivation level wasn't high, it was very smart. Ever since it established a spiritual beast contract with her, it was like a fish in water in the virtual sky world. Aside from occasionally pestering her to play with it, it never needed her to take care of it. When it was thirsty or hungry, it would find something to eat on its own. She didn't need to care much about its cultivation, she just needed to give it medicinal pills from time to time. But what was going on? Xiaohua whimpered and circled around Mo Tiange twice, looking very downcast. Mo Tiange didn't have time to pay attention to it. She carried Feifei back to her cultivation room and carefully examined the spiritual aura inside its body. The special characteristic of the Feifei race was that they didn't have great power, but they had a unique affinity. It was the same for Feifei. The spiritual energy in its body was quite gentle and not invasive at all. As soon as one approached it, it gave people a feeling of holiness. After a while, Mo Tiange finally withdrew her spiritual aura from Feifei's body and a frown appeared on her face. She had checked Feifei's meridians and dantian and didn't find anything abnormal, but it was a fact that the spiritual aura was very weak. What exactly went wrong? Did it eat something? Or did something go wrong with its cultivation? Regardless of which it was, as long as there was no abnormality in its spiritual aura, she was helpless. Generally speaking, when a cultivator or spiritual beast encountered a problem in their cultivation, it would directly reflect on their spiritual aura. At that time, as long as the chaotic spiritual aura was straightened out, their injuries would naturally heal. But Feifei's current situation wasn't like that, which completely baffled Mo Tiange. She was anxious for a long time, but she could only think of one method. Since its spiritual aura was weak, she could just replenish it. However, this method was somewhat risky. If she replenished too much spiritual aura, it wouldn't be able to bear it for a while, and its meridians and dantian would also be damaged. After thinking for a while, Mo Tiange clenched her teeth and made up her mind. If she let Feifei go on like this, its spiritual aura would become weaker and weaker, and in the end, it wouldn't be able to escape its fate of death. She might as well risk it. With that thought in mind, she took out a jade bottle from her Qinkuan bag, poured out a pill, and fed it to Feifei. Feifei was still lying motionlessly on the ground, but soon, its body began to slowly warm up. Seeing that it was effective, Mo Tiange was delighted and continued to stare at it. After a while, the pill's effect slowly weakened, so she fed it another pill. Then she kept repeating the process. When the spiritual aura dissipated, she fed Feifei medicine. After a while, when the spiritual aura dissipated again, she continued to feed it medicine. Time passed day by day. Feifei never woke up, but it also didn't die. Mo Tiange called Xiaofan over, and together with Xiaofan, they took turns feeding Feifei medicine. Because she left most of the medicine to Qin Shi before she left, she opened the furnace again to concoct medicinal pills. A month later, the spiritual aura in Feifei's body finally increased. It wasn't as thin as before, and its dissipation speed wasn't as fast. Mo Tiange once again used spiritual aura to enter its meridians, going deep into its dantian along the meridians, and finally found the source of the spiritual aura dissipation. As it turned out, there was a weak mass of spiritual aura inside Feifei's dantian. If she didn't look carefully, she wouldn't be able to find it at all. This mass of spiritual aura seemed to be wrapped in something. She carefully probed the spiritual aura, only to find that it was actually a small thing as weak as a speck of dust. It was this thing that was slowly absorbing its spiritual aura. Now, this speck of dust seemed to have eaten its fill and was a lot bigger than before, which was why Mo Tiange discovered it. Although she found the source, it was an unknown object, so Mo Tiange didn't dare to deal with it casually. She continued to feed Feifei medicinal pills while observing the speck of dust. As more and more medicinal pills were fed, the speck of dust finally stopped absorbing spiritual aura, and Feifei's body slowly warmed up. Mo Tiange heaved a sigh of relief. As long as Feifei didn't die, she could slowly investigate the cause. But Feifei still didn't wake up. The speck of dust absorbed its fill of spiritual aura and slowly grew bigger, as if it was undergoing some kind of change. Several months later, the speck of dust suddenly exploded, emitting a strong spiritual aura. Tiange was shocked. She was afraid it would injure Feifei's dantian, but miraculously, Feifei's spiritual aura was extremely close to the speck of dust. It even separated a part of its spiritual aura to wrap around the speck of dust, seemingly protecting it. Upon seeing this, a thought occurred to Tiange. Could it be that this thing originally belonged to Feifei? This was strange. Feifei was something produced in its body, so why was it crazily absorbing its spiritual aura, causing it to almost lose its life? If no one looked after it and didn't feed it medicinal pills to replenish its spiritual aura, wouldn't Feifei have been tormented to death by this thing? Tiange couldn't answer this question now, so she could only wait for Feifei to wake up. Surrounded by rich spiritual aura, the golden light on Feifei's body became brighter and brighter. Gradually, its whole body was enveloped by a dazzling golden light. Then, countless spiritual aura rushed into its body. Tiange was extremely shocked as she watched the scene in front of her. She knew what was happening. This situation was very similar to when Xiaohua advanced to the 5th rank. Feifei was about to advance to the next realm. What happened next proved her conjecture. Feifei didn't stop absorbing spiritual aura. The golden light submerged the whole cultivation room. Within the golden light, Feifei's spiritual aura fluctuations became stronger and stronger. It was no longer as weak as before, but it began to undulate, breathe, and circulate. Now that she was sure it was about to advance, Tiange felt relieved. She left the cultivation room to Feifei while she looked for another room to meditate and refine her magic weapon. As for Xiaohua, it automatically stood guard outside the door to protect Feifei. Seeing this, Tiange smiled knowingly. In this virtual sky world, Xiaohua and Feifei had no other playmates. The two spiritual beasts had accompanied each other for dozens of years and had a very good relationship with each other. When Xiaohua advanced, Feifei was anxious. Now that Feifei was about to advance, Xiaohua was the same. Spiritual beasts and spiritual beasts were spiritual beings of heaven and earth, so they also had human feelings. In addition, she was also looking forward to Feifei's appearance after it advanced. She remembered that when she was in Linhai, the people of Bishuan court told her that Feifei was a kind of unique spiritual beast. They didn't have powerful spells, but they could coexist peacefully with other demonic beasts. They were also very sensitive to spiritual aura, but their cultivation was extremely slow. Generally, an adult Feifei was only in the 2nd or 3rd rank. Tiange already felt it was very good that Feifei could cultivate to the 4th rank so quickly in this virtual sky world. If it advanced again, it would be in the 5th rank. A 5th rank spiritual beast was equivalent to a core formation cultivator. Most likely, the cultivators in Linhai had never seen a 5th rank Feifei, right? Tiange didn't know whether it had any unique spells or not. Among her 3 spiritual beasts, Xiaofan and Xiaohua were already in the 5th rank. If Feifei also advanced to the 5th rank, other core formation cultivators would be envious. It was already difficult for them to have one 5th rank spiritual beast, so where would they find 3? If it wasn't for the virtual sky world, Tiange wouldn't have 3 5th rank spiritual beasts. Raising spiritual beasts required a lot of medicinal pills. Most cultivators couldn't even guarantee their own medicinal pills, so how could they casually give them to spiritual beasts? In the following time, Tiange sacrificed and refined her magic weapons while waiting for Feifei to advance. Because of the special circumstances of Feifei's advancement, she didn't dare to leave rashly. She could only put other matters aside and wait until Feifei confirmed its advancement. Several months later, the cultivation room Feifei was in finally stopped absorbing spiritual aura and burst with dazzling golden light. This golden light spread and practically dyed the entire virtual sky world gold. Spiritual lights fluttered in the sky. Tiange stretched out her hand and discovered that specks of spiritual light were scattered all over the virtual sky world. She was extremely astonished. The momentum of Feifei's advancement was actually much stronger than Xiaohua's. It looked a bit like a cultivator's core formation. Could this also be a characteristic of its race? The spiritual lights lasted for about half a day before they finally dissipated slowly. The spiritual aura also gradually calmed down. Xianxia stood outside the cultivation room. Just as she was about to push the door open, she heard a squeak, and the door was pushed open. Then a mass of golden light threw itself into her arms and a delicate voice rang in her ears. "Master!" Xianxia held Feifei, whose body was still petite but whose momentum was completely different. She was extremely astonished. "Feifei, you can talk?" Feifei rubbed itself against her chest and yawned. It then said with satisfaction, "I can finally talk. I've been holding it in for so long." Xianxia was petrified. She knew Feifei wasn't an ordinary spiritual beast, but why did its voice, which was as delicate as a child's, have this kind of old-fashioned tone? Wasn't Feifei a very cute and playful little spiritual beast? Chapter 358. Xianxia was sitting on a praying mat in the cultivation room. There were 2 cups of tea on the small tea table in front of her, emitting smoke. In front of her, Feifei was rolling around on the cattail hassock while combing his shiny golden fur. When it finished combing its golden fur, it sat on the praying mat in a very elegant posture. Then it picked up the tea with its claws, narrowed its eyes, and took a sip with satisfaction. Xianxia was already shocked, so she was very calm when she looked at Feifei. Xiaofan was a sea dragon, so it had wisdom that surpassed spiritual beasts of the same rank. Xianxia already knew this, but she didn't expect Feifei would also have such wisdom when it advanced. It didn't look like a spiritual beast at all. Even if it was a human, it rarely had such rich expressions. In that case, maybe it really was a descendant of the distant past divine beast, Feifei. After drinking the tea, Feifei raised its head and stared at Xianxia with its round eyes for a long time before it said, "Without you, I wouldn't have been able to advance to the 5th rank so quickly. And I'll recognize you as my master." Recognize? In other words, it actually didn't quite agree with the concept of master. Xianxia was speechless for a while before she remembered to ask, "Don't we have a spiritual beast contract?" Feifei curled its lips, scratched the golden fur on its forehead, and said, "That's one thing, but if I don't want to recognize you, it's not impossible." It raised its head to look at Xianxia and continued, "The most important thing is that our Feifei is very grateful. Without you, I probably wouldn't have advanced to the 5th rank until the end of my life, so I'll recognize you as my master." Ever since Feifei learned how to talk, Xianxia had been rendered speechless many times. This Feifei definitely wasn't that playful, and spoiled little spiritual beast from before. In the end, she had no idea what it was. "Master, what's with your expression?" Feifei raised its head and asked her in a delicate voice. Xianxia was silent. She picked up the teacup on the tea table and took a big gulp, but it was so hot that she spat it out, splashing the tea on the tea table and Feifei's beautiful golden fur. Feifei rolled around and jumped non-stop. "My fur, you made my fur wet." Xianxia wiped the corner of her mouth and rubbed her brows. She cast a spell, causing the water stains on Feifei's body to disappear without a trace. Seeing that her golden fur had regained its bright luster, Feifei squatted back in satisfaction and continued to straighten them out one by one. Xianxia stared at him for a long time. In the end, she felt powerless. "Are you the original Feifei?" "Of course." Feifei did not even raise her head. She licked her golden fur and said, "Well, actually, you can say that it's half of me." "Yeah." Feifei played with its golden fur and said, "Didn't you notice that the phenomenon of my leveling up is a little abnormal?" Xianxia said, "There's something inside your body that's absorbing all the spiritual aura in your body. I'm very confused. If we didn't come in at that time and Xiaohua didn't notice anything wrong with you, wouldn't you have died here?" More or less. At the mention of this topic, Feifei's expression was indifferent. "If you didn't come back in time, I would have failed my advancement and died." "Why?" Xianxia blurted out. "Could it be that when your Feifei advanced to the 5th rank, there were elders watching over you?" "Elders?" Fei Fei wagged her tail. Her gaze was helpless, and her delicate voice carried a hint of melancholy. How could our Fei Fei have any elders watching over us? It's already good enough that we didn't die out. Tiange wrinkled her brows. What does that mean? The Fei Fei race is going to be extinct soon? Upon seeing her doubt, Fei Fei coughed, sat up straight, and said, "Since I recognized you as my master, you have the right to know these things. Before I tell you these things, I have to first let you know what kind of race we Fei Fei are." After a long silence, Fei Fei said, "The cultivators in Linhai all think we're just a race that's close to the Fei Fei from the distant past era, but in fact, we're the descendants of the Fei Fei." Upon seeing Tiange's doubtful gaze, Fei Fei rushed to say, "Are you wondering why I know these things?" Tiange nodded. "Before you advanced to the 5th rank, your intelligence wasn't high. When I got you, you were just a cub. That being the case, where did you hear these things from?" Fei Fei said, "This is exactly what I want to tell you. What kind of race we Fei Fei are." It paused for a moment, then said, "Since the distant past era, we've lived in the human world and we're called spirits. Because we were born with powerful strength, we're also called divine beasts. The so-called divine beasts are led by the 4 symbols: the Qilin, the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise guard the 4 directions, and the Qilin guards the central palace. The azure dragon is wood, the white tiger is gold, the vermilion bird is fire, the black tortoise is water, and the Qilin is earth. Under the 4 symbols and 5 spirits, there are us, the spirit race, who are born with divine breath. Although we're not as powerful as the 5 spirits, every divine beast race has its own characteristics. The characteristics of us Fei Fei are our innate affinity and inheritance of divine power." Inheritance? Tiange was stunned. A thought flashed in her mind. Could it be that you can even inherit memories? Correct. Fei Fei waved its paw and praised, "You're worthy of being my master." It paused for a moment, then continued to say, "We Fei Fei don't have powerful spells, but we can make friends with all spiritual beasts, even ferocious beasts are no exception. In addition, every Fei Fei born will be born with the common memory of their race sealed." Tiange thought for a moment. "So, you've always had the memory of your race in your body, but your cultivation level was too low, so you couldn't inherit it?" "Correct." Fei Fei stretched out its paw and looked at it carefully. "Every Fei Fei is like this. When they advance to the 5th rank, the memory in their body will fuse with them. However, ever since the world was divided into 2 realms, we Fei Fei who stayed in the human world couldn't advance to the 5th rank without the guidance of our elders." 2 realms? Tiange suddenly realized this topic seemed to be related to the changes in the human world since the distant past era. "Since you're divine beasts, why didn't you go to the spiritual realm?" "Of course it's because something went wrong." Fei Fei put its paw on the tea table and said, "When the world was divided into 2 realms, most of our ancestors went to the spiritual realm, but some weak ones were left in the human world. Don't ask me why, I can't possibly know everything. Inheritance of memories isn't omnipotent." "Master, you've also seen the process of my realm advancement. Without the guidance of a powerful elder, it's impossible for me to advance by myself. This is also the reason why the strength of our Fei Fei is getting lower and lower. Even when we grow up and die, we're only in the 2nd or 3rd rank." Tiange was deeply touched by this. In that situation, if she returned to the virtual sky world a bit later, Fei Fei would have had all its spiritual aura absorbed by the dust in its body and died. She thought for a while, then asked, "What's going on with that thing in your body?" When Xiaohua advanced, it was very similar to human cultivators in the core formation realm, but you're completely different. Is this the difference between the divine beasts of the distant past era and the spiritual beasts of today? "That's not it," Fei Fei said. "The thing in my body is actually the inner core we were born with. We spiritual beasts are different from you cultivators. Even if we're in the 1st rank, we still have a chance to form an inner core. It's just that the chance is very small. But our Fei Fei's inner core is innate." "Oh." Tiange understood. "So, when you advance to the 5th rank, as long as your inner core absorbs enough spiritual aura, you can advance successfully?" It's just that our cultivation levels aren't high enough. Our inner cores are very weak and can't affect our bodies at all. Only when our cultivation levels are high enough will our inner cores be stimulated and start to absorb spiritual aura. As long as we absorb enough spiritual aura, we can advance smoothly. I see. Tiange nodded to show she understood. Fei and the others were the descendants of the divine beasts left in the human realm when the demonic beasts were separated. Due to the characteristics of their race, without elders to look after them, they could only become weaker and weaker until they were reduced to ordinary spiritual beasts. Therefore, the original Fei was really innocent, but the current Fei had inherited the memory of its race and became a real Fei. Alright, I'm done. Fei's original proper kneeling posture turned into a crouching position. It blinked and stared at Tiange. In an instant, its voice became flattering. Master, your clear sky pills are very delicious. Can you let me eat too? Tiange's hand paused and her eyebrows twitched. How do you know clear sky pills are delicious? Have you ever secretly eaten them? She had always given the 3 spiritual beasts medicinal pills that were specially concocted for them. Clear sky pills were medicinal pills for human core formation cultivators, so she had never given them to Fei. Hee. Fei laughed and buried its face under its paws. Master, when you were concocting medicinal pills, I was curious, so I secretly hid too. Tiange closed the teacup, crossed her arms over her chest, and stared at it. Could it be that you suddenly advanced because you ate clear sky pills? A 5th-rank spiritual beast was equivalent to a human's core formation realm, so logically, clear sky pills could only be eaten by spiritual beasts above the 5th rank. Fei had just advanced, so what was its cultivation level when it ate clear sky pills? Master, don't be angry. Seeing that Tiange's eyebrows were raised, Fei quietly shrunk its body down, revealing only its head. This is the intuition of a divine beast. When my cultivation level is high enough, I really want to eat to replenish my spiritual aura. I've always let you eat whatever you want in the medicinal garden. Tiange snorted. When I first got you, you wanted to eat flowerless golden fruits, and now you actually want to eat clear sky pills. Right. Fei hastily nodded its head. At that time, I was only in the 1st rank, so eating flowerless golden fruits wasn't a problem. Now, eating clear sky pills naturally wouldn't be a problem. I'm a divine beast, so I'm naturally different from ordinary spiritual beasts. Hey master, don't pull me. I'm a divine beast now. I'm no longer the Fei you could rub around as you pleased. Chapter 359. She originally planned to have more contact with the cultivators of Jiuyan sect after arriving at Sky Snow City, but she didn't expect Fei's advancement would delay her for more than half a year. When Fei's matter was finally settled, Tiange exited the virtual sky world. However, to her surprise, several sound-transmitting talismans were floating in front of her cave. She collected all the sound-transmitting talismans. 2 of them were sent by cultivators who lived with her in Ling Clan's cave. They wanted to say hello when they heard there was a foundation-building cultivator living here. The last talisman was a bit strange. The person who sent it was a cultivator from the Ling family that she had met once when she rented the cave abode. The content of this sound-transmitting talisman was very simple. It only said that if she came out of closed-door meditation, she should reply. But Tiange felt it was very strange. She had erased the Ling clan's spying restriction in this cave, so how did this person know she was in closed-door meditation? Moreover, it seemed like this sound-transmitting talisman had stopped here for a long time. How did he know when she would reply? Maybe it would be useless at that time. After thinking about it, she still replied to the sound-transmitting talisman according to the message left by the Ling clan cultivator. After that, she prepared to take a stroll in Sky Snow City. Unexpectedly, just as she closed her cave, she saw a flame flashing across the sky. Another sound-transmitting talisman flew towards her. Tiange took the sound-transmitting talisman. The talisman ignited by itself and said, "Fellow Daoist, please wait for a moment. I'll be there soon." Mo Tiange was stunned. What does this mean? Is this person waiting for my reply? Moreover, he's looking for me in such a hurry. Is there something urgent? No matter what it is, I'll know after a while. After waiting patiently for a while, Mo Tiange suddenly looked up and saw a blue flight light flashing across the sky with a powerful momentum rushing towards her. Then, a core formation cultivator wearing an apricot-colored Daoist robe landed in front of her. I'm Ling Yunhe. How should I address you, fellow Daoist? This person raised his hand and greeted her politely. Mo Tiange was startled. The person in front of her had a clean face and handsome facial features. His long black hair was neatly tied into a Daoist bun with a crown. The apricot-colored Daoist robe he wore was painted with gorgeous cloud patterns, which seemed to highlight its owner's extraordinary identity. He looked imposing and had the demeanor of an immortal. But, for all that, she found traces of familiarity in that face, and the tone of voice, which roused her memory. This person was actually the cultivator of the Ling family who had helped her with the procedures when she rented the cave abode. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that the unkempt and shabby-looking foundation establishment cultivator back then would look like this after changing his clothes. Not only did he look much younger, but his aura was also extraordinary. Most importantly, this person was hiding his cultivation level just like her. He wasn't in the foundation building realm, but the middle stage of the core formation realm. Mo Tiange raised her hand to greet him but didn't answer his question. Instead, she asked bluntly, "Fellow Daoist Ling, what brings you here?" Hearing this question, surprise flashed across this person's eyes. Then he smiled and said, "Aren't you going to ask me how I know your cultivation level and why I'm hiding it?" Mo Tiange stared at him and said faintly, "If fellow Daoist is willing to tell me, of course I want to know." Her meaning was that if he didn't want to tell her, it was useless for her to ask. Upon hearing her answer, this person smiled. "Sure enough, I didn't find the wrong person." He looked behind Mo Tiange and asked with a smile, "Fellow Daoist, aren't you going to invite me in to sit?" Mo Tiange thought for a moment. This person definitely had something to tell her. Judging from his attitude, it shouldn't be something bad. Thus, she made an inviting gesture. "Fellow Daoist Ling, please come in." When Ling family rented this cave, they had already prepared daily necessities, so Mo Tiange directly invited this person into the small hall used for receiving guests. The two of them sat down. This Ling family cultivator looked around the cave then said with a meaningful smile, "Fellow Daoists' attainments in formations are really profound. This defensive formation is really extraordinary." Mo Tiange smiled but didn't answer. She had erased the prying restriction on Ling family's formation, so this person must have seen through it at first glance. She was a core formation cultivator, so there was no reason for people to spy on her at will, so she didn't need to feel guilty. There was no tea for guests, and Mo Tiange's attitude wasn't warm either. This person probably realized he wasn't welcome, so he looked a bit embarrassed. He coughed and asked for the second time, "May I know how to address fellow Daoist?" Mo Tiange paused for a moment then answered, "My surname is Qin, and my first name is Wei." Since she didn't know this person's intentions, Mo Tiange made up a name. Qin Wei, a homonym for Qingwei. "Oh, so it's fellow Daoist Qin." This person nodded without any doubt. "Although it's not our first time meeting, we both concealed our cultivation levels last time, so we can't be considered acquaintances. This time, let me formally introduce myself to fellow Daoist Qin. I'm Ling Yunhe, a cultivator from Sky Snow City's Ling family and an elder of Juyan sect." "Fellow Daoist Ling, it's an honor to meet you." Mo Tiange politely greeted him again. She had already guessed this person's identity. Ling family belonged to Juyan sect. Since this person was a core formation cultivator, he must also be an elder of Juyan sect. Ling Yunhe returned the greeting. His gaze lingered on her for a while, then he said sincerely, "Fellow Daoist Qin, it's a bit presumptuous of me to suddenly pay you a visit, but please rest assured. I absolutely don't have any bad intentions." Under his gaze, Mo Tiange was dumbfounded for a moment before she suddenly understood what he meant. "He thinks I'm a single woman, so he's wary of men? Tienga didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When she was in the celestial pole, she first disguised herself as a man. Later on, she reverted to her female appearance, but she also had the identity of Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple. No one had ever deliberately explained that she was a woman. She didn't expect to encounter this kind of situation when she came to Yunzhong. She found it funny, and she suddenly had a good impression of this Ling Yunhe. No matter what this person's intentions were, he still treated her with enough respect even though he didn't know her identity. Thinking up to this point, Tienga smiled and said, "Fellow Daoist Ling, please don't blame me. When we first met, fellow Daoist was just a foundation-building cultivator. You're very different from today. Besides, we're not friends, so we suddenly met through voice transmission and you saw through my cultivation level, so I understand." Ling Yunhe smiled and waved his hand. "I can explain this matter to fellow Daoist one by one." He paused for a moment then said, "To be honest, the cultivation technique I practice makes me very sensitive to spiritual aura. If there's any aura of spiritual treasures in the surroundings, it basically can't escape my eyes and ears. When I saw fellow Daoist Qin that day, I sensed a lot of aura of spiritual treasures around your body, so presumably you have a lot of spiritual treasures. This aura of spiritual treasures doesn't belong to a foundation-building cultivator, so I speculate that fellow Daoist is indeed a core formation cultivator who's just hiding your cultivation level." Oh! Tienga was surprised. She thought to herself, Yunzhong actually has such a strange cultivation technique? With the help of the spirit-concealing pendant, even a nascent soul cultivator wouldn't be able to see through her breath-concealing technique. However, this kind of cultivation technique basically didn't need to see through her breath-concealing technique to infer her true cultivation level. It seems fellow Daoist hasn't come into contact with this kind of cultivation technique. Ling Yunhe smiled and said, "That's not strange. This kind of cultivation technique is unorthodox. You can't find more than a few of them in Yunzhong." "I see." Tienga calmed down. "Then why didn't fellow Daoist expose me that day?" Ling Yunhe shook his head. "Why should I? There are so many cultivators in the world. How many of them don't have some secrets? Our Ling clan is only renting an immortal's cave. As long as they don't have any ulterior motives towards Sky Snow City or our Ling clan, we won't care how many secrets they have." "Is that so?" Tienga smiled and didn't refute him. The real situation naturally wouldn't be as simple as Ling Yunhe made it out to be. Otherwise, why would Ling clan need to set up a spying restriction in the Immortal's cave? If there were any secrets among these cultivators that could bring benefits to Ling clan, they definitely wouldn't stand idly by and act like some kind men or women. However, what he said wasn't wrong. If it wasn't harmful to Sky Snow City or Ling clan, they probably wouldn't meddle in other people's business. As for why I hid my cultivation level, Ling Yunhe shook his head with a slightly sad expression on his face. "I won't hide it from fellow Daoist Qin. This matter involves my Ling clan and Juyen sect's power, so I was forced to hide my cultivation level." Tienga raised her eyebrows. Ling Yunhe saw that she had a faint smile on her face. She didn't immediately declare that she wouldn't meddle in their sect's business and didn't pursue the matter, so he felt a bit nervous. As he recalled his purpose for coming here, he clenched his teeth and said bluntly, "Fellow Daoist must know that my Juyen sect is now facing the sect head selection that happens once every 100 years, and I'm one of the candidates for the position this time." Tienga nodded lightly. As it turned out, not only did this fellow Daoist Ling have an extraordinary background, but his status was also quite important. Although the head Grand Supreme Elder was the most important identity in a big cultivation group, the position of the sect head wasn't something ordinary people could sit on. Generally speaking, the head Grand Supreme Elder was the cultivator with the highest cultivation level in the sect. However, because of this, they usually cultivated wholeheartedly and rarely left their immortals' caves. Therefore, they would only make decisions in the face of important matters. Usually, the sect's affairs were handled by the sect head. As a candidate for the position of sect head, talent, background, connections, and ability were all indispensable. After all, The sect head represented the sect's face, so his talent couldn't be too bad. At the very least, he had to be presentable. This position was usually the result of the various forces in the sect weighing the pros and cons, so people without a background definitely couldn't sit on it. In addition, the sect head usually had to deal with affairs. If he didn't have connections and ability, then the sect head would be equivalent to trash. Since this fellow Daoist Ling could be listed as one of the candidates for the sect head, he seemed to be quite extraordinary. He definitely wasn't the drunkard and sloppy person she met for the first time. Upon seeing Imo Tienga's calm expression, Ling Yunhe couldn't help but feel a bit depressed. He even suspected that he came to the wrong place. If this fellow Daoist Qin wasn't completely clueless about the sect's affairs, then she was too shrewd. The calmer she was, the more passive he became. Should he say it or not? He began to hesitate. While he was still hesitating, Imo Tienga calmly asked, "Does fellow Daoist Ling's purpose for coming here have something to do with this?" Chapter 360. Looking at the calm Imo Tienga in front of him, Ling Yunhe felt both happy and worried. He was happy because this person acted calmly, so he should be the right person to choose. He was worried because she seemed too calm, so it would be difficult to bargain with her. After thinking for a while, he finally said, "I came to ask fellow Daoist Qin for a small favor. As long as you agree, I'll reward you handsomely even if I can't complete it." After saying that, he stared at Imo Tienga without blinking. Imo Tienga just smiled and asked, "Why did fellow Daoist choose me?" With fellow Daoist Ling's identity, whether it's the Ling family or Juyen sect, it should be easy for you to find someone to help you. Why did you choose an unreliable outsider like me? Fellow Daoist Ling didn't even ask about my background. Seeing that she didn't refuse him immediately, Ling Yunhe sighed in relief and said with a smile, "To tell you the truth, I didn't ask my fellow disciples for help because of the sect head selection. Fellow disciples have conflicts of interest, so it's inconvenient to interact with them. As for the Ling family..." A gloomy expression flitted across Ling Yunhe's face. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "I hid my cultivation level because I didn't want to participate in these fights. My eldest cousin represented the Ling family in the sect head selection. Therefore, after I was injured, I deliberately pretended that my cultivation level dropped and asked for a job from the patriarch, making them think I suffered a big blow and couldn't recover. Who knew, man proposes, God disposes." Ling Yunhe's words involved the Ling family's and Juyen sect's secrets. Imo Tienga didn't understand. Were the cultivators in Yunzhong too gullible, or was Ling Yunhe really a magnanimous person? He actually dared to say this kind of thing to a complete stranger. Ling Yunhe's expression wavered for a while before he finally heaved a sigh. His gaze once again fell on Imo Tienga. "In short, the sect head selection still falls to me. However, this matter is quite complicated. Not only does it involve the power struggle within the group, but it also involves the conflict of interest between the various Ling clans. Therefore, I have no choice but to look for other helpers." Imo Tienga smiled as if she had no interest in Juyen sect's secrets. She continued to ask, "Fellow Daoist, you still haven't made it clear. Aren't you afraid I'm someone with ulterior motives?" To this question, Ling Yunhe smiled and said, "Although I have considered this point, I still believe that fellow Daoist Qin is the most suitable candidate." Ling Yunhe said, "First of all, fellow Daoist Qin came to my Ling clan to rent a cave abode. You hid your cultivation and only rented a cave abode with blue gas. This means that you are very low-key and not someone who likes to show off. Secondly, fellow Daoist is cautious and steady. If we cooperate, this is what I value the most. Thirdly, fellow Daoist has many numinous treasures and is quite powerful." He turned his gaze, revealing a meaningful smile. "The most important point is fellow Daoist's background. In my opinion, fellow Daoist Qin isn't a person of my Eastern Tang at all, right?" Imo Tienga was stunned. She stared at the cloud-soar crane with vigilance in her eyes. Upon seeing Imo Tienga's expression, Ling Yunhe hastily waved his hand. "Fellow Daoist Qin, please don't misunderstand. The reason I know about this is because ever since I built my foundation, I've often traveled around. Not to mention Yunzhong continent, I've even been to Yuan province and Shaoyang city. Fellow Daoist Qin's tone of voice is something I've never heard before. Moreover, the way you conduct yourself is also different from the cultivators I've met in the past. That's why I speculated that fellow Daoist Qin isn't a person of my Eastern Tang state or even Yunzhong. Upon hearing his explanation, Mo Tiange slowly relaxed. She thought for a moment, then calmly said, "Fellow Daoist Ling's guess is correct. I'm indeed not a person of Yunzhong." Upon receiving confirmation, Ling Yunhe smiled. "That's right. Fellow Daoist Qin isn't a person of Yunzhong continent, so we naturally don't have any conflicts of interest. This time, I'm asking for your help because I'm more reliable than other people." Mo Tiange smiled faintly. She didn't immediately ask what he was asking for help with. Instead, she said, "When did fellow Daoist Ling send the sound-transmitting talisman? Aren't you worried that I won't be able to help you when I come out?" Ling Yunhe helplessly said, "I sent the sound-transmitting talisman a month ago. After fellow Daoist Qin entered the cave, you stayed in seclusion for half a year, so I couldn't contact you. However, fellow Daoist Qin only paid 1 year's rent. In any case, you'll have to come out to renew the lease, right? If I calculate the time, I can still make it." Mo Tiange couldn't help but laugh at his words. She originally didn't plan to stay in Sky Snow City for a long time, but because of Feifei's realm breakthrough, she was delayed for so long. She actually forgot that she only paid 1 year's rent. Ling Yunhe stared at her and earnestly said, "Fellow Daoist Qin, I've already explained my purpose for coming here in full detail. I wonder if fellow Daoist Qin can help me." "Fellow Daoist Ling," Mo Tiange interrupted him and asked with a smile, "I already understand your purpose for coming here, but it'd be too rash to agree just like that. May I know what fellow Daoist Ling wants my help with? If it's too dangerous, I don't need to take the risk." Fellow Daoist is right. Ling Yunhe nodded to express his understanding. Fellow Daoist Qin isn't a person of Yunzhong continent, so you probably don't know the content of Juyan Sect's sect head election. Those who can sit on the position of Juyan Sect's sect head must have the best temperament, cultivation level, ability, and connections. Each of these must pass a strict test. To be honest, I'm quite confident in temperament and ability. It's only my cultivation level that was injured a while ago that greatly affected my strength. Now that the sect head election is right in front of us, our Ling clan must not give up. Therefore, in order to win in the sect head election, we must look for some treasures. Fellow Daoist Ling, Mo Tiange couldn't help but ask, since Ling clan is a great cultivation clan of Juyan sect, there must be nascent soul cultivators in the clan, right? If that's the case, wouldn't it be better to ask a nascent soul cultivator to bestow 1 or 2 treasures to us? Why do we need to go through so much trouble? Ling Yunhe smiled bitterly. Fellow Daoist Qin, you might not know this, but among the nascent soul cultivators, which one of them doesn't have a nascent soul elder as their backer? If we can win with just this sect head election will be too easy. In the sect head election, we can only use 3 magic weapons, so we have to rely on our own spells most of the time. My cultivation level is injured, so I'm very passive in the sect head election. Oh? I see. What method did fellow Daoist Ling come up with? What kind of spiritual treasure are we going to find? Seeing that she didn't refuse, Ling Yunhe was happy and continued to say, "The spiritual treasure I'm looking for is the fretless fruit in Carefree Valley. I wonder if fellow Daoist Qin has heard of it?" Fretless fruit? Mo Tiange shook her head. Although she read a lot of ancient books and records, she didn't know much about Yunzhong. Mo Yaoqing's notes didn't mention it, so she didn't know about it. Ling Yunhe explained, "Speaking of fretless fruit, we have to talk about Carefree Valley first. Carefree Valley is a very famous secret place in Yunzhong. According to legend, this place used to be a paradise in the Middle Ages with abundant spiritual aura and spiritual treasures everywhere. Unfortunately, the world changed, and the Carefree Valley became filled with miasma. Thus, it became a dangerous place. However, the spiritual aura from the Middle Ages era still remains here, so there are still many spiritual treasures here. Among them, the most famous is the fretless fruit. This fretless fruit grows on the fretless tree, which only grows in Carefree Valley. It's like a living thing, disappearing as soon as it enters the ground, so it's very difficult to find. But if you can find the fretless tree and pick the fretless fruit, it'll bring you great benefits. After eating the fretless fruit, you'll have endless spiritual aura for a day. Is that so? Tiange couldn't help but be moved. Within a day, he would have an endless supply of spiritual qi. It was no wonder that Ling Yunhe wanted to find the carefree fruit. With it, he would be almost invincible in a battle even if he could only bring 3 enchanted treasures with him. Even her virtual sky world didn't have this kind of treasure. Upon seeing Tiange's expression, Ling Yunhe continued, "Fellow Daoist Qin, if you help me find the fretless fruit, I can guarantee I only want one. I won't be greedy." Tiange's gaze wavered, but she didn't agree immediately. Instead, she asked with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Ling, what kind of help do you have? Don't tell me it's just the 2 of us?" "Of course not," Ling Yunhe said. "I also have a few friends. This time, I asked 2 of them to help me, and they also invited another 2 people. So, including fellow Daoist Qin, there are 6 people in total." Tiange's gaze flickered, but she still said, "Really? Fellow Daoists, friends and friends' friends. You're all on the same side, right?" Ling Yunhe keenly understood the meaning behind her words and immediately said, "My 2 friends have indeed been best friends for many years, but the other 2 people aren't friends. They only came to help because of the special terrain of Carefree Valley." 3 against 3. Tiange nodded slightly. This Ling Yunhe was really thoughtful. He had 2 friends to help him, so he wouldn't be at a disadvantage on this trip. He also invited the other 3 people to help him to reassure them. What about their cultivation levels? 2 are in the middle stage of the core formation realm, and the other 2 are in the early stage. My 2 friends each have 1, Ling Yunhe answered immediately. Obviously, he had thought about this a long time ago. Tiange looked at him and smiled. "After saying so much, fellow Daoist Ling seems to be sure I'll go? If I don't come out, what will you do?" Upon hearing this question, Ling Yunhe was stunned for a moment, then he smiled bitterly. "If that's the case, I'll have to find someone else. To tell you the truth, I've been looking everywhere for a month, but unfortunately, I haven't found a suitable candidate. Their cultivation level can't be too high or too low, and their identity and personality must be suitable. As an elder of Juyen's sect, I have a lot of good friends, but it's inconvenient for me to invite any of them at this time. Carefree Valley isn't simple either. We calculated that at least 6 people are needed to safely pass through the valley entrance. Fortunately, fellow Daoist came out at this time, otherwise I'd really have a headache." At this point, Ling Yunhe promised, "Rest assured, fellow Daoist Qin. Although this trip is dangerous, I'm more than 70% sure I'll come back safely. Fellow Daoist Qin, you must have experienced many dangers when you're traveling alone. 70% is enough for me to take a gamble." The process of cultivation was almost a constant gamble. Advancing to the next realm was a gamble, and finding fated chances was even more of a gamble. This was the same for cultivators in both the Celestial Pole and Yunzhong. Tiange also knew what Ling Yunhe said wasn't false. Most cultivators were willing to take a gamble if they could find something like the carefree fruit with more than 70% certainty. However, was it necessary for her to do so? Chapter 361. Facing Ling Yunhe's invitation, Tiange considered it again and again but still didn't give a definite answer. Although Ling Yunhe's words were very good, it was too risky to say yes just like that. Ling Yunhe felt very regretful about this, but he politely asked Tiange to think about it. Tiange agreed. It wasn't that she wouldn't go. After all, Ling Yunhe's identity was clear. If he became the head of Juyen's sect, it would be much more convenient for her to make friends with him in Yunzhong. Even if he couldn't become the head, it would be very beneficial for her to know an elder of Juyen's sect now that she was alone in Yunzhong. After Ling Yunhe left, Tiange also left the cave and went to the market square of Sky Snow City. Whether she agreed or not, she had to give Ling Yunhe an answer. That being the case, she might as well go to Sky Snow City to inquire about the information he said and see if it was really worth the risk. The market square of Sky Snow City was located in the center of Sky Snow City. The map in her hand was real except for the sign of Ling Clan's Immortal's Cave. Mo Tiange smoothly found the location of the market square according to the map. The market square of Sky Snow City also belonged to Ling Clan. As soon as Mo Tiange stepped into the market square, she saw the huge word Ling fluttering in the wind at the entrance. Since most of Sky Snow City was Ling Clan's property, it was normal for the market square to belong to Ling Clan. This was the main source of spirit stone income. Any cultivation clan with some property would be involved in the market square business. The purpose of Mo Tiange's trip was the tea house in Sky Snow City. The so-called tea house was quite common in Yunzhong. Its purpose was to facilitate cultivators to make friends and inquire about information. At first, when Mo Tiange saw the mark of the tea house on the map, she didn't understand it. After asking Ling Yunhe, she learned the purpose of the tea house. Because of this, Ling Yunhe was even more certain that she wasn't a cultivator from Yunzhong, so Mo Tiange vaguely admitted that she was a cultivator from another continent. As for whether she was Shaoyang or Yuanzhou, Ling Yunhe couldn't guess that she was from the Celestial Pole. After all, the Celestial Pole and Yunzhong were separated by the South Sea, and they hadn't had much contact for more than 100,000 years. The tea house in Sky Snow City looked like a rather simple shop. However, there was a tall flag with the word on it that was faintly glowing, which made it seem unusual. In Yunzhong, the tea house's flag was very particular. The strength of the spirit qi on it indicated the grade of the tea house. If it was only a faint spiritual aura, it meant the place was mainly used to entertain aura-refining cultivators. If it was a spirit tool, it meant there were foundation-building cultivators around. If it was a magic tool, it meant core formation cultivators could be found in the tea house. Of course, the tea flag could also be a magic weapon, which meant there was a nascent soul cultivator guarding the tea house. However, Mo Tiange also knew this was only in theory. Even if the cultivation level of Yunzhong was higher than that of the Celestial Pole, it shouldn't be so high that they could casually hang their magic treasures outside, right? The tea flag on the tea house in Sky Snow City was clearly a magic treasure. This meant that core formation cultivators could be found in the tea house. This wasn't strange. Sky Snow City was close to Jiuyan sect and was the territory of Jiuyan sect's Ling clan, so there would naturally be many high-level cultivators coming and going in the vicinity. However, Mo Tiange still didn't show her real cultivation level because the matter she wanted to inquire about was related to Jiuyan sect's affairs. As a core formation cultivator, it would be somewhat inconvenient. "Senior, are you alone?" Just as she arrived at the entrance of the tea house, a low-level cultivator immediately lifted the curtain and very considerately led her inside. Once she entered, Mo Tiange raised her head and looked around. She suddenly felt like she was in a completely different world. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary shop, but inside, there was a hall the size of a public square. In the hall, there were several long tables and chairs separated by flowers and trees. The hall looked well-proportioned, spacious, and bright. There were many cultivators with similar cultivation levels gathered in groups of 3 to 5, chatting and laughing. Mo Tiange glanced around and found that most of the people here were foundation-building cultivators. There weren't many aura-refining cultivators, and core formation cultivators were naturally the least. She estimated there were only about 10 people, and they were all in the wing rooms. "Senior, are you alone?" the shop assistant asked again. Mo Tiange regained her train of thought and nodded at him. "Yes." The shop assistant showed a professional smile and continued to ask, "Then, are you looking for companions or making friends?" Looking for companions? Mo Tiange thought about it. She was probably looking for cultivators in the same realm as her to adventure with. She answered, "I want to communicate with cultivators in the same realm as me." "Oh, I see," the shop assistant said. "Our tea house charges 1 spirit stone. If you're at your own leisure, we won't charge you anything else." If you need to introduce a senior to us or look for someone, you'll have to pay extra. Mo Tiange nodded to show she understood. She took out a spirit stone and gave it to the shop assistant. The shop assistant immediately gave her a new waste tablet and said, "Senior, please help yourself. If you need anything, just call us." Mo Tiange nodded, then casually found an empty seat in the hall and sat down. The shop assistant served her tea, then left. Mo Tiange sat on an empty seat against the wall, slowly sipping her tea while her gaze swept over the other people in the hall from time to time. The cultivators here seemed to be much more enthusiastic than those in the celestial pole. She saw with her own eyes 2 cultivators she didn't know chatting with each other very enthusiastically. The soundproofing method of these foundation-building cultivators wasn't a problem for her. She could clearly hear some cultivators talking about cultivation. Some experiences were considered secrets in the celestial pole. Only very close friends or fellow disciples would talk to each other, but they didn't hold back at all. She thought to herself that no matter what, Yunzhong was a place where the atmosphere of cultivation was excellent. Fellow Daoist. Just as she was thinking, a voice came into her ears. Mo Tiange turned around and saw a middle-stage foundation-building cultivator with a burly appearance talking to her. "Is fellow Daoist here to look for companions?" Mo Tiange shook her head gently. Seeing her outstanding cultivation level, the burly man didn't want to give up and asked again, "Fellow Daoist, are you not interested in treasure hunting? We're only short of 1 person." Mo Tiange shook her head again and smiled. "I'm just here to rest for a while and communicate with fellow Daoists." After receiving another negative answer, the burly man felt regretful, but he didn't pester her any further. He excused himself and left. Afterward, several people came to talk to her. 2 of them were also looking for companions, while the others wanted to exchange goods. Mo Tiange still shook her head and refused. "Fellow Daoist, may I sit here?" Another voice came into her ears. Mo Tiange turned around. This time, it was a young-looking early-stage foundation-building cultivator who was looking at her shyly. She thought for a moment. "Sitting here? Does he mean he wants to chat with me?" She was waiting for this, so she nodded and smiled. "Of course." The young man was overjoyed to see her polite attitude. Mo Tiange's current cultivation level was in the late stage of the foundation-building realm. The foundation-building realm wasn't the aura-refining realm. There was a huge difference between the early stage and the late stage. A late-stage cultivator was equivalent to several early-stage cultivators. The young man sat down. An attendant who was walking on the side immediately served him tea before he respectfully retreated. "My surname is Tan, and my name is Dongchen. I'm from Qing province. May I know how to address you?" The young man said politely. "My surname is Qin, and my name is Wei. I come from the Outer Endless Sea." The Outer Endless Sea was what Yunzhong called the other continents that were separated by the sea, like Shaoyang and Yuanzhou. She came from the celestial pole, so it was reasonable to say that she was also from the Outer Endless Sea. Upon hearing this, Tan Dongchen's eyes lit up. "Since you're from the Outer Endless Sea, you must be very knowledgeable." Mo Tiange smiled and didn't deny it. "I've just been to a few places." She raised her head and looked at the young man. He was very young, only in his early 20s. His expression was bashful, as if he was not good at socializing with people. However, he was polite and well-educated. Based on her experience, this youth was only in the early stage of the foundation-building realm. His appearance also didn't look like he'd taken look-preserving pills or the like. His movements were very youthful, so he should have just built his foundation. Maybe he was only in his 20s or 30s. With that thought, she asked, "Fellow Daoist Tan, you're so young. Did you just build your foundation?" Tan Dongchen's eyes widened in surprise. How did fellow Daoist Qin know? Mo Tiange smiled. "It's just experience. The longer you live, the more you'll see." Oh. Upon hearing her answer, Tan Dongchen looked a bit disappointed. He'd been observing this female cultivator for a long time. She looked young, had a gentle temperament, and sat there quietly. Although she wasn't very beautiful, she was very attractive. This kind of female cultivator was very rare in Yunzhong. Her high cultivation level was one of the reasons she had such a high cultivation level, but what was rare was that she was very amiable and always had a smile on her face, leaving a good impression on others. He summoned his courage to come forward and talk to her. He always felt that although this girl was already in the late stage of the foundation building realm, she should be very young. Maybe she was only in her 70s or 80s, so she shouldn't be much older than him. However, Tienga's words just now hinted that he was quite old, which made his guess come to nothing. He was very disappointed. However, no matter how disappointed he was, being able to communicate with a fellow late-stage foundation-building cultivator was something he could only hope for. Therefore, he quickly cheered up and said to Tienga with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Qin's eyes are really sharp. I've indeed just built my foundation and came out to travel." Tienga nodded with a smile. Her gaze lingered on Tan Dongshan for a while, then she asked, "Fellow Daoist Tan, you have an extraordinary bearing. Are you a disciple of a big family?" This question made Tan Dongshan look slightly proud. He nodded and said, "Yes, I'm a disciple of the Tan clan in Qingzhou." Tan clan in Qingzhou? Tienga wasn't from Yunzhong, so she knew nothing about it. However, judging from Tan Dongshan's expression, it should be a famous big family, so she took the opportunity to praise him. "I see. Fellow Daoist Tan is a disciple of a big family and is also young and promising. You're really a young talent." I wouldn't dare. Upon hearing her praise, a shy smile appeared on Tan Dongshan's face again. "I'm nothing in the clan. I only built my foundation when I was in my 30s. My elder brothers built their foundation when they were in their early 20s. I'm far behind them." "Huh? Really?" Tienga raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Building your foundation in your 30s is quite rare. Even elite disciples of big cultivation groups can only do this, right?" Tan Dongshan scratched his head embarrassedly and changed the topic. "Let's not talk about me. Fellow Daoist Qin, you're from the outer endless sea. Why did you come to Yunzhong?" "I've never seen a person from the outer endless sea. I came to travel," Tienga said. "I just came from North Pole Island and haven't been in Sky Snow City for long. I heard there's a tea house in Sky Snow City, so I came to take a look and communicate with fellow Daoists in Yunzhong. Maybe it'll be helpful for my cultivation." She looked at the young man and smiled. "Fellow Daoist Tan, since you're a disciple of a big family, presumably your vision is also extraordinary. I wonder if you'd like to share your cultivation experience with me?" Chapter 362. After talking with Tan Dongshan for a while, Tienga soon figured out what happened. The Azure Province was a large city only a few hundred kilometers away from Sky Snow City. The Tan clan of Qing Province, like the Ling clan of Sky Snow City, was the #1 cultivation clan in the region. More than half of the entire Qing Province belonged to the Tan clan. However, unlike the Ling clan, though the Tan clan was inextricably linked to the Jiuyan sect, they did not belong to the Jiuyan sect in name. In reality, the Tan clan did not belong to any sect. In their clan, the strongest was a nascent soul cultivator, and there were also several core formation cultivators, as well as countless foundation building and qi refining disciples. Such a great cultivation clan was not inferior to an ordinary mid-sized sect. Among the large sects, they often held a decisive position. However, the Tan clan was not a member of some great sect. They used the clan as their foundation and recruited outer sect disciples. Over the past several thousand years, they had become more and more powerful in the Azure Province, and their might was no different from that of a sect. It could be said that they were actually a sect, just a family clan. And the reason why the Tan clan was able to gain a foothold in Azure Province was also because of their relationship with the Jiuyan sect. Tan Dongshan said that because of their close proximity, the Tan clan had in-laws with many clans in the Jiuyan sect, including the Ling clan. Tienga had been in Xianxia school for a long time, so she knew that many clans in this kind of big cultivation group relied on marriage to stabilize their relationships. She immediately understood that Tan clan also used this method to form a beneficial alliance with Jiuyan sect. That was why they were able to develop such a great clan right next to Zhiyan sect. After learning about all this, Imotienga really admired the successive clan masters of the Tan clan. Zhiyan sect's status in Yunzhong was even stronger than that of Tiandao sect in the Celestial Pole. Tiandao sect was known as the #1 cultivation group in the Celestial Pole, but among the 7 great cultivation groups, Xianxing school and Gujian sect weren't much weaker. But in Yunzhong, Zhiyan sect was not only the #1 sect for cultivators, it was also the #1 sect for all cultivators. Ever since the decline of Dawning Pill sect, no sect in Eastern Tang had been strong enough to catch up to Zhiyan sect. They could only watch as Zhiyan sect grew stronger and stronger. After thousands of years, the current Zhiyan sect could be said to be a great crocodile in the clouds. No one dared to block its path. Not only had the Tan clan established a firm foothold by the bedside of the Zhiyan sect, they had even developed and become stronger. This kind of ability to wield power and influence was truly impressive. Among the people Mo Tiange knew, even Luo Fengxue, who always talked like a human or a ghost, didn't have this kind of ability. Although they said they were exchanging cultivation experiences, in fact, with the gap in their cultivation levels, it was Mo Tiange who was giving Tan Dongchen pointers. Tan Dongchen knew that he had taken advantage of the situation, so he had nothing else to say. He told him about the situation in Yunzhong, especially about the Zhiyan sect. The management style of the Zhiyan sect was different from that of the large sects in the Celestial Pole. Although they also enjoyed power and status according to their cultivation levels, the positions of sect head, administrator, and elders had to go through an election. This was especially true for the position of sect leader. Any core formation cultivator in the sect could participate as long as they were nominated by the 2 grand elders. The election process was completely transparent. Even ordinary disciples could clearly understand it. However, Mo Tiange knew this was only on the surface. After all, those nascent Soul Grand Supreme Elders had the final say on who was qualified to participate, and in the end, it was still those Grand Supreme Elders who would decide who won. Therefore, the position of sect leader could only be considered partially transparent. The final position of the sect leader was not only a competition between the various candidates, but also a competition between the forces represented by the Grand Supreme Elders. Speaking of this matter, Tan Dongchen mysteriously told her about some gossip. As it turned out, many wonderful things happened in the Zhiyan sect's sect leader election. For example, one of the original candidates, a core formation cultivator from Yin clan, went out to search for treasures for the sect leader election, but in the end, he mysteriously disappeared. As for Ling clan's candidate, he encountered a high-level sea beast in the Sea of Returning Ruins and returned with serious injuries. He had no choice but to withdraw from the election and was replaced by another cultivator. When Mo Tiange heard this, her eyes brightened. She asked, "Could it be that there's some secret behind this?" Tan Dongchen looked around then said mysteriously, "Who knows what happened? However, all the accidents happened so coincidentally. There can't be such a coincidence in this world, right?" The 2 of them looked at each other and smiled tacitly. Mo Tiange asked again, "Let's forget about Yin clan's matter, but the Ling clan's candidate encountered a sea beast in the Sea of Returning Ruins. This can't be fake, right?" "That's hard to say," Tan Dongchen said. "I heard in the clan that the Ling clan has been fighting fiercely in the past few decades." The original sect leader candidate was a direct descendant of the Ling clan, but the current candidate is from a branch family that has always been suppressed by the direct descendant. Tan Dongchen told her about this matter in detail. As it turned out, although the Ling clan was huge and had a large population, the talented people in the branch family had always withered, and the affairs in the clan had always been decided by the direct descendant. However, 100 years ago, a cultivator appeared in the Ling clan. He built his foundation at the age of 20 and formed his gold core at the age of 80. In one fell swoop, he became the most eye-catching junior in the Ling clan. At the same time, several descendants of the Ling clan also produced talented people who formed their gold cores. In the past 100 years, there had been many talents emerging, and it was supposed to be the time for the Ling family to shine. However, for some reason, these rising stars of the Ling family were fighting endlessly for the sake of their own interests, dragging the Ling family into an endless power struggle. At this point, Mo Tiange learned the name of that genius from Tan Dongchen. Sure enough, it was Ling Yunhe. Before the sect leader election, outsiders originally guessed that Ling Yunhe would participate in the election. Unexpectedly, he was injured in an accident and his cultivation level dropped, so the Ling clan sent a direct descendant to participate without a doubt. Who knew that the incident in the Sea of Returning Ruins would happen? This Ling clan cultivator had no choice but to withdraw from the sect leader election. Originally, people thought the Ling clan could only give up this time, but not long after, Ling Yunhe's cultivation level recovered and he was sent to participate again. This matter was full of ups and downs and twists and turns, which really made outsiders enjoy talking about it. Outsiders didn't know what was hidden in this matter, but this didn't prevent them from enthusiastically guessing. Mo Tiange listened to several versions relayed by Tan Dongchen and was so happy that she almost couldn't hold back. Among them, some said that Ling Yunhe was suppressed by the direct descendant and was unwilling to withdraw from the sect leader election, so he plotted against his clan elder brother. Others said that the clan elder brother plotted against Ling Yunhe, but in the end, man proposes, God disposes. The funniest part was that the clan elder brother was very fond of this cousin, but Ling Yunhe was too arrogant and ignored him. Because his love for Ling Yunhe turned into hatred, he wanted to suppress Ling Yunhe in everything, so he did everything possible to prevent Ling Yunhe from becoming the sect leader. Unfortunately, he made one wrong move and in the end, he still lost. Mo Tiange was dumbfounded at first, but soon after, she held back her laughter until her stomach hurt. Immortals in the cultivation world weren't any different from mortals. There were indeed many gossips. At the very least, those who could think of this inside story were definitely not ordinary people. In the end, Mo Tiange ended her conversation with Tan Dongchen with satisfaction. Tan Dongchen received a lot of pointers on cultivation and listened to a lot of news about overseas. From Tan Dongchen, she also learned a lot about the situation of the cultivation groups in Yunzhong. Everyone was happy. Mo Tiange bid farewell to Tan Dongchen with satisfaction. Just as she was about to leave the tea house, she suddenly felt a powerful divine sense fall on her body. She narrowed her eyes. Although this divine sense was powerful, it couldn't completely suppress her, so it wasn't a nascent soul cultivator's divine sense. But if it was a core formation cultivator's divine sense, it was a bit too powerful. It should be known that she cultivated the soul refining art and was now in the middle stage of the core formation realm. Ordinary cultivators in the late stage of the core formation realm might not have a divine sense as strong as hers. However, this divine sense was undoubtedly much stronger than hers. Was this person a friend or a foe? Mo Tiange's mind spun rapidly. If it was an enemy, it didn't seem menacing. But if it was a friend, the unscrupulous probing intent was too obvious. While she was thinking about this, she heard a voice in her ear. "Miss, you're obviously a core formation cultivator. Why are you hiding your cultivation level?" It was a man's voice that sounded a bit feminine with a gloomy chill. When he spoke, he obviously wasn't in front of her, but his words seemed to be right next to her ear. Mo Tiange paused. With a flash of light, the heaven and earth fan immediately appeared in her hand. She stared fiercely at the room on the right. Along with her movement, the fierce intent in the divine sense, which was still restrained, immediately spread. Mo Tiange suddenly felt a murderous intent surging towards her as if it wanted to suppress her divine sense. In an instant, Mo Tiange's eyes swept around. She opened and closed the heaven and earth fan and tapped the back of her hand. An invisible barrier appeared around her, protecting her tightly. Huh. The man was surprised, but then he smiled. Interesting, really interesting. Mo Tiange also smiled. She tapped the back of her hand with the heaven and earth fan and looked at the room. Fellow Daoist, relying on your powerful divine sense to bully others doesn't seem good, does it? Such an unforeseen event made the attendants in the tea house look at her in surprise, but none of them dared to step forward. Only now did they realize that this seemingly young girl was actually a core formation cultivator. Bully? Ha. Along with the laughter, the door of the room was opened and a black-robed man appeared at the door. He wore a black cloak embroidered with golden silk, looking very gorgeous. He looked young and his face was like the autumn moon. He was unexpectedly very handsome. However, no matter how one looked at him, this handsome young man's fair face exuded a strange aura, and the aura around his body was heavy with devil aura. The late stage of the core formation realm. Tienga's expression was solemn. She stared at this person and cautiously clenched the heaven and earth fan in her hand. This person definitely wasn't a Dao cultivator. From the looks of it, he should be a beast cultivator or a devil cultivator. Seeing her movements, this person smiled slightly. Miss, you're already in the middle stage of the core formation realm, and your divine sense is so powerful. How can you say it's bullying? I'm not sure I can win against you. Tienga snorted coldly. If it's not bullying, you and I don't know each other. Why did you use your divine sense to suppress me? This person blinked and a look of sudden realization appeared on his face. He then bowed and said, if that's the case, it's my fault. I'll apologize to Mississippi. Oh, let me formally introduce myself to Mississippi. My name is Xianxia, and people call me Devil Monarch Xianxia. May I know Mrs. Great Name? Chapter 363. After living for 100 years, cultivating to the core formation realm and seeing a lot of cultivators, Tienga discovered one thing. As long as a person had a firm Dao heart, regardless of whether they were men or women, they would always address them as fellow Daoist. However, when they saw them, they would address them as Mississippi. Most of the time, they had the intention of being a man or a woman. For example, when Jing Xingji saw a female cultivator for the first time, he would most likely call her Mississippi. Not only did this Black Moon Devil Monarch address her as Miss, but his attitude was also very attentive. If Tienga couldn't see through his ulterior motives, she'd be playing dumb. However, the situation wasn't clear yet, so it wasn't a bad idea to play dumb. I'm Qin Wei. May I know what advice fellow Daoist Black Moon has for me? Tienga answered faintly. So it's Miss Qin. Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled at her. It is fate that brought us together. If I have offended you just now, I would like to invite you in as an apology. I wonder if you would do me the honor? Inside the room were the auras of several core formation cultivators, both strong and weak. Because the room was protected by a formation, he couldn't sense them very clearly. However, there were at least 5 of them. It was clear that this group of people was having a gathering. However, he didn't know if these people already knew each other, or if they were like the aura refining and foundation establishment cultivators in the hall who came here to interact with each other. If it was the latter, it wouldn't be a problem for her to enter. However, if it was the former, it wouldn't be good. While he was hesitating, his gaze suddenly swept over the attendants around him. These low-level aura refining cultivators were looking at them with trepidation. She thought about it and smiled. She raised her eyebrows and said, since fellow Daoist Xianxia sincerely invites me, I won't refuse. Hearing this, a smile appeared on Black Moon Devil King's coquettish face. He stepped aside and said, Miss Qin, please. With a smile on her face, Tienga put the heaven and earth fan into her sleeve and swaggered into the wing room. What was there to be afraid of? This was the tea house of the Ling family in Sky Snow City. In any case, the Ling family was a large family with a nascent soul cultivator. How could anyone dare to mess around here? Besides, she knew she wasn't a mediocre person. Previously, she obtained so many spiritual treasures from Mo Yaoqing and had already finished refining them, so she had some confidence in protecting herself. Once she entered the side room, Tienga immediately felt everyone's gaze falling on her. Tienga swept her gaze around and saw a huge round table in the middle of the room. Around the table sat 6 cultivators. They were all in the core formation realm. Among them, 5 were in the early stage of the core formation realm, and 1 was in the middle stage of the core formation realm. Including the Devil Monarch of the Mystic Moon, he was the only one in the advanced stage of the completion level. When they saw her, a few of them revealed surprised expressions. It was unknown if they were surprised by her youth or her cultivation. This is fellow Daoist Qin? These people all heard the conversation between Mo Tiange and Black Moon Devil Monarch. At that moment, a middle-aged Confucian scholar stood up and politely cupped his hands. Mo Tiange showed a faint smile and returned the salute. Yes. Her gaze shifted, and she cupped her hands towards the people around her as a greeting. When the others saw this, they didn't dare to dally, and they all stood up to return the greeting. At this moment, Mo Tiange had already made up her mind. Among these people, there was a scholar in scholarly robes, a bald monk, a beautiful Daoist nun, and there were also people who seemed to be from the devil path. Their outfits were very different, so they probably weren't from the same group. With so many core formation cultivators, it would be too shocking if they were all from the same group. Fellow Daoist Qin, I'm Han Shizhi, a professor at South Zhou's Yushan Academy. Greetings. This was the scholar in scholarly robes who first greeted her. He was the only cultivator in the middle stage of the core formation realm. This poor monk's dharma name is Yuan Kong. I'm the supervisor of South Zhou's Taolin Temple. Although this monk looked fierce, his attitude was actually humble and polite. This poor Daoist is Qin Yunzi, an individual cultivator. This was a middle-aged Daoist with a 3-inch long beard. He had a very sage-like demeanor. My surname is Yang Qingji. The one who spoke was a devil cultivator whose whole body was hidden in a black cloak. The devil aura around his body was very ostentatious. I'm Yong Ruyu, and this is my junior martial sister, Qiu Qingruo. We're both cultivators from Danxia sect. Greetings, fellow Daoist Qin. Upon hearing the words, Danxia sect, Mo Tiange's eyes brightened. She then shifted her gaze to this pair of martial siblings. Both of them were dressed in Daoist robes. The man was in his 30s, and the woman was a bit younger. Both of them were in the early stage of the core formation realm. So you're cultivators from Danxia sect. Her thoughts turned at lightning speed. She immediately greeted the two of them. Her attitude towards this pair of martial siblings from Danxia sect was obviously different from the others. Puzzled, Yong Ryu couldn't help but ask, fellow Daoist Qin, could it be that you know people from my Danxia sect? Mo Tiange smiled. I don't know them. However, my ancestor has some connection with Danxia sect. Qiu Qingrua interrupted and asked, may I know what connection fellow Daoist Qin has with my Danxia sect? Mo Tiange's gaze faintly swept over Qiu Qingrua, who was intentionally or unintentionally holding Yong Ryu's hand. She smiled and said, to be honest, I'm not from Yunzhong. It's just that 1,000 years ago, my ancestor was from Yunzhong. I once heard that when my ancestor was in Yunzhong, he received a favor from Danxia sect. Yong Ryu and Qiu Qingrua glanced at each other but didn't say anything. Although Danxia sect had declined, it was still a great cultivation group with tens of thousands of years of inheritance. This kind of thing was too common. Nevertheless, Devil Monarch Black Moon said with great interest, so Miss Qin isn't from Yunzhong. May I know your origin? Why did your ancestor leave Yunzhong back then? As far as I know, the cultivation resources in the outer endless sea can't compare to those in Yunzhong. Mo Tiange smiled and said faintly, I've only lived for more than 100 years. How could I know what happened 1,000 years ago? I only know a few words passed down by my ancestor, so I only have a rough idea of where they came from. What fellow Daoist Qin said makes sense. The middle-aged scholar, Han Shizhi, twirled his beard and said with a smile, no matter what your origin is, since fellow Daoist Qin's ancestor was also from Yunzhong, fellow Daoist Qin can also be considered a person from Yunzhong. I wonder if fellow Daoist Qin returned to Yunzhong from the outer endless sea to look for your roots? Mo Tiange cast a glance at Yong Ryu and her martial sister, then nodded with a smile. I've heard about Yunzhong since I was a child. It's been so many years since I've seen it, so I've always wanted to come to Yunzhong. Now, my wish has finally been fulfilled. Haha, in that case, we can be considered to be fated. Han Shizhi laughed and said, fellow Daoist Qin, please sit. It's too impolite to keep fellow Daoists standing. Tiange still had a smile on her face. She cupped her hands at the 7 people around her, then calmly picked a seat and sat down. Fellow Daoist Qin. This time, the one who spoke was Qin Yunzi. Compared to Han Shizhi, his attitude always carried the estrangement characteristic of individual cultivators. At this moment, he cautiously sized up Tiange, then asked, "Since fellow Daoist's cultivation level is in the middle stage of the core formation realm, why are you pretending to be a foundation-building cultivator? If it wasn't for fellow Daoist Xuanyue's secret technique, we would have missed you." Upon hearing this question, the 7 people's gazes all fell on her. Tiange knew that although they politely invited her in and greeted her, they were still wary of her. She calmly said with a smile, "To be honest, although my ancestors all came from Yunzhong for more than 1,000 years, almost no other ancestors have set foot here, so I know nothing about Yunzhong. Before I left this time, my master repeatedly warned me to be careful and not to think I can run amok just because I have a small cultivation level. There are many talented people in Yunzhong, and every cultivator has extraordinary strength. I mustn't offend others just because I have some magic weapons. Because of this, when I arrived in Yunzhong, I was unfamiliar with the people and the place, so I didn't dare to rashly reveal my cultivation level." What she said was half true and half false. Before she left, Lord Daoist Jinghe indeed warned her to be careful when she went to Yunzhong, which was separated by the ocean. However, Lord Daoist Jinghe was a flamboyant person, so it was impossible for him to say things like not to offend others. Nevertheless, the core formation cultivators present didn't know this. They only felt what Tiange said was reasonable. Moreover, everyone could hear the admiration she had for Yunzhong in her words. Everyone felt that it was very useful, so they let go of their guard against her. "I see. Fellow Daoist Qin is really cautious. But in fact, you don't have to. We cultivators in Yunzhong, whether we're Daoists, Confucians, Buddhists, or devils, don't have any deep hatred. We always don't offend others if they don't offend us. As long as fellow Daoist Qin didn't do anything taboo, we won't show hostility to others at will." Tiange smiled apologetically. "Just now, I chatted with a little friend in the hall for a while, so I also learned about this. It's just that I didn't expect fellow Daoist Xianxia to see through my disguise before I left. Speaking of this, I'm very curious. I'm not boasting, but my breath-concealing technique is passed down from my ancestors. Even nascent soul seniors might not be able to see through it. How did fellow Daoist Xianxia know my real cultivation level at first sight?" This was indeed something Tiange was surprised about. It was fine if Ling Yunhe saw through it. In fact, he only inferred she wasn't a foundation-building cultivator from the aura of spiritual treasures on her body and didn't really see through it. However, Devil Monarch Xianxia was different. His divine sense was very strong, even stronger than hers, who cultivated the soul-refining art. He seemed to be able to see through her cultivation level directly. This was unusual. Her spirit-concealing pendant was refined by a deification senior. Zhong Muling even clearly said that with the spirit-concealing pendant on her, it wouldn't be a problem even if she wanted to pretend to be immortal. It didn't make sense for a core formation devil cultivator to see through her disguise so easily. After they returned to the wing room, Devil Monarch Xianxia, who had been sitting at the corner of the round table and playing with a teacup, chuckled softly. His gaze swept over Tiange and he reached out to stroke his hair narcissistically. He then said, "What's so strange about this? Miss Qin is a Dao cultivator, so you don't understand the matters of us devil cultivators. We devil cultivators naturally have some secret techniques that are very different from you Dao cultivators. To be honest, Miss Qin, your breath-concealing technique is very outstanding. You've been in the hall for so long, but I've never noticed it. However, before we left, you unintentionally released your divine sense, and divine sense happens to be the field I'm most proficient in. So I noticed it." What he said was equivalent to not saying anything. However, Tiange also knew that some secret techniques would never be taught to outsiders, not even to devil cultivators. Nevertheless, at least she knew what she had overlooked. Devil Monarch Xianxia mentioning divine sense made her realize that she was indeed a bit conceited about her divine sense being superior to others, so she unintentionally released it. Just now, before she left, she just swept the entire tea house with her divine sense out of habit. If it was someone else, they wouldn't have noticed it at all. However, Devil Monarch Xianxia's divine sense was astonishing, so he saw through her. It seemed she still had to be a bit more cautious. Even if she had the spirit-concealing pendant, she still had to do other things flawlessly. Chapter 364. As it turns out, fellow Daoist Blackman's divine sense is outstanding and you also have a secret technique. I was conceited, Emotienga flattered Devil Monarch Black Moon with a faint smile. The Black Moon demonic monarch's eyes wandered about, looking very pleased with himself. It was unknown whether or not he was deliberately showing off. This time, Emotienga finally saw through him. This devil cultivator was naturally narcissistic. He always had to maintain a natural and unrestrained demeanor. He wasn't deliberately trying to seduce her alone. If that was the case, it wouldn't be hard to get along with him. Then, the 8 of them exchanged some polite words with each other. Finally, the Black Moon Devil Monarch coughed and pulled the topic back. He swept his gaze over everyone before finally resting his gaze on Emotienga. Miss Qin, just now, the 7 of us were exchanging spiritual objects. I wonder if you're interested? When she said that, the 7 of them looked at her again. Han Shizhi said with a smile, most of us gathered here to look for treasures. Since fellow Daoist Qin came from the outer endless sea, I presume that the spirit items you have are very different from us cloud cultivators. Perhaps we both have something that the other party urgently needs. Exactly. Qin Yunzi smiled. I wonder if fellow Daoist Qin came from Shaoyang or Yuan province. I once wanted to go to the outer endless sea, but I couldn't get away. Until now, I have only been to the inner endless sea. The internal sea referred to the sea area where some islands near Yunzhong were located. These sea areas were often the strongholds for cultivators to catch sea beasts, such as North Pole Island. As for the external sea, it referred to places like Yuan Province and Shaoyang, which were separated from Yunzhong Ocean. Emotienga just smiled and softly changed the topic. The place I came from is a bit different from Shaoyang and Yuanzhou. However, perhaps there really is something you need there. Hearing this, the Black Moon Devil Monarch said, since Miss Qin doesn't object, does that mean you'll be participating in the exchange? Emotienga nodded, indicating she had no objections. The Black Moon Devil Master smiled and glanced at the crowd. He continued, before Lady Qin joined us, we just finished talking about cultivation. Since that's the case, let's begin. A trade fair organized by cultivators was naturally different from the one organized by Shang clan. No one was introducing treasures, and no one was stirring up the atmosphere. Among them, the Mystic Moon Demonic Monarch had the highest cultivation, so he tacitly agreed to be the host. After saying this, the Black Moon Devil Monarch threw out a few items and said casually, see if you're interested in these items. You can exchange them with items or buy them with spirit stones. Emotienga looked down and saw several kinds of ores, spiritual plants, and a magic weapon on the table. The cultivation method of fiendish cultivators was different from that of Daoist cultivators. Therefore, the materials needed for elixirs and spiritual treasures were different from those for Daoist cultivators. These spiritual herbs and minerals were good materials for Daoist cultivators to refine elixirs and spiritual treasures, but they were not very useful for fiendish cultivators. This was even more so for Dharma treasures. Therefore, the Black Moon Devil Monarch did not even bat an eye when he threw these things out. Ores and spiritual plants were all good things, but Emotienga didn't need them. Nevertheless, that magic weapon made her take a few more glances at it. This magic treasure looked like a mottled embroidered sword. There was a lot of dust on it, but it faintly exuded an extraordinary aura of wind and thunder. She couldn't figure out what was going on with this magic treasure. If it was really a spiritual treasure, it shouldn't have such mottled embroidery, right? It wasn't like it was an ordinary iron from the secular world. But if it was an ordinary object, how could it have such a strong aura? Ordinary magic treasures would only have such an aura when they were in use. Just by throwing it here, it already had such an aura. Almost only a magic treasure with a spirit would have such an aura. The ores and spiritual plants were quickly exchanged by the other people. In the end, everyone's eyes were on this magic treasure. Like Xianxia, they couldn't figure out the details of this magic treasure. For a moment, they hesitated, not knowing whether they should exchange it or not. The Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled and said leisurely to the crowd, "Is everyone not interested in this Fuxing sword?" His words stunned everyone. Yang Ruyu and Qiu Qingrua looked shocked. Even Qing Yunzi, Yuan Kong, and the others' expressions froze. They stared motionlessly at the rusted sword on the table. Fuxing sword? Could it be Senior Fu Yao's Fuxing sword? Yang Ruyu stared at the rusted sword and asked nervously. The Black Moon Devil Monarch raised his eyebrows and showed a faint smile. Otherwise, fellow Daoist Yong, do you think there's another Fuxing sword? After getting an affirmative answer, everyone's expressions became more interesting. Yang Ruyu, Qiu Qingrua, and Qing Yunzi looked nervous, while Yuan Kong and Han Shizhi looked awed. Mo Tiange was confused. Fuxing sword? Fu Yao? What's that? Black Moon Devil Monarch cast a glance at her and showed a bewitching smile. Miss Qin, you're not from Yunzhong, so it seems you've never heard of the Fuxing sword and Fu Yaozi? Mo Tiange nodded. I haven't been in Yunzhong for long, so I've never heard of them. May I know what this Fuxing sword is? And who is Fu Yaozi? Fuxing sword is Senior Fu Yaozi's sword. The one who answered was Yang Ruyu. He took a deep breath and calmed down a little. He looked at Mo Tiange and said, Senior Fu Yaozi is a legendary senior expert in Yunzhong. He was a cultivator from tens of thousands of years ago. He didn't belong to any sect and was just an individual cultivator. Relying on his divine power, he moved unhindered in Yunzhong. Even the cultivators from Yuanzhou and Shaoyang City had to bow down to him. When he was alive, the Devil Path and the Tao couldn't coexist. Because of him, the Devil Path was suppressed to the point where it almost had no place to stand. According to the ancient records, when he was still in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, he fought 10 nascent soul devil monarchs alone and didn't show any signs of losing. In the end, those 10 devil monarchs had to retreat to the Sea of Returning Ruins. Not only that, Qing Yunzi's expression was full of reverence as he continued to say, although he was an individual cultivator, he created a whole set of cultivation techniques for Tao cultivators and passed them on to the world. He also shared his cultivation experience with the public without reservation, allowing many individual cultivators to walk on the right path of cultivation. In the past tens of thousands of years, although Senior Fu Yaozi didn't pass down his cultivation group and didn't have any disciples, countless cultivators benefited from him and called themselves his successors. At this point, Qing Yunzi added, this humble Daoist is the same. There's actually such a person in Yunzhong? Mo Tiange was greatly astonished. The path of cultivation was full of thorns and thorns. It was normal for cultivators to kill each other. Cultivation experience was a cultivator's secret, but he actually made it all public. It was really shocking. This Senior Fu Yaozi isn't just that. Han Shizhi answered with a smile. He was a professor at the academy, so his knowledge was naturally extensive. As far as I know, this Senior Fu Yaozi not only has tyrannical strength, but he also has a unique understanding of morality. I once read about Senior Fu Yaozi's morality in an ancient book. It's very different from the fellow Daoists who cultivate the Tao today. This Senior Fu Yaozi believes that cultivators have more power than mortals, so they should bear more responsibility. When a kind of power loses its restraints, it will affect the laws of heaven and earth. Therefore, not only should cultivators not kill each other, but they should also help each other. Mo Tiange was stunned. She muttered, shouldn't kill each other, but should also help each other, correct. Qing Yunzi sighed and said, Senior Fu Yaozi has always held this kind of philosophy all his life. Even if he once killed someone, he could still let go of the enmity with a smile. He's really magnanimous. This kind of broad-mindedness has never been seen in Yunzhong for more than 100,000 years. He can actually cultivate to the nascent soul realm? Mo Tiange was very shocked. Could such a person really walk to the end of the path of cultivation? Not just the nascent soul realm, Yong Ryu said. Senior Fu Yaozi has always been moving unhindered in Yunzhong. It's said that he finally advanced to the deification realm. However, this is only a legend. There are many different opinions about Senior Fu Yaozi's final outcome in ancient books, so no one knows which one is true. But one thing is certain. Black Moon Devil Monarch answered. He seemed to be very disapproving of Yong Ryu, Qingyunzi, and the others' words, and his expression was very unhappy. Fu Yaozi is the idol of all cultivators in Yunzhong. Just now, Yong Ryu said that in the era Fu Yaozi lived in, Yunzhong's Dao and Devil Monarchs were irreconcilable, and Fu Yaozi once defeated 10 Devil Monarchs. Black Moon Devil Monarch was a devil cultivator, so he naturally didn't like Fu Yaozi. However, no matter how much he disliked him, he had to admit that Fu Yaozi's strength was indeed outstanding. I see. Mo Tiange was very fascinated. Unfortunately, this senior Fu Yaozi lived tens of thousands of years ago. Otherwise, I really want to see his elegant demeanor. We Dao cultivators are all like this. Seeing her fascinated expression, Yong Ryu immediately felt close to her, so she said with a smile. However, Qiu Qingrua glared at her angrily and pinched her hand. Seeing this scene, Mo Tiange couldn't help but smile. No matter how clumsy her eyes were, she could see that this pair of martial brother and sister had a relationship. Now that her heart belonged to someone else, she naturally wouldn't provoke others. However, this Qiu Qingrua was too nervous. Could it be that just because a woman said something to Yong Ryu, she would suspect that she had a disloyal heart? Yong Ryu didn't seem to notice it at all. Her gaze once again fell on the Fuxing sword on the table. Fellow Daoist Black Moon, where did you get this Fuxing sword? If it's Senior Fu Yaozi's relic, it must be extremely expensive. Black Moon Devil Monarch raised his eyelids and said, I obtained this sword by accident. After many verifications, I confirmed that it was Fu Yaozi's Fuxing sword. I asked many Devil Path seniors, and this sword disappeared when the 10 Devil Monarchs fought Fu Yao. It was probably left in the Devil Domain at that time. You don't need to be so scared. Although the Fuxing sword is powerful, this sword isn't the complete Fuxing sword. Hearing this, Qingyunzi was stunned and asked anxiously, Fellow Daoist Black Moon, what do you mean? Black Moon Devil Monarch said lazily, do you think this sword will still be full of spiritual aura after tens of thousands of years and being corroded by devil aura in the devil domain? Yong Ryu and the others were stunned, but the excited expressions on their faces calmed down a little. Yes, the devil domain was full of devil aura. If this treasure was left in the devil domain, it would definitely be corroded by the devil aura. After tens of thousands of years, it was already rare that it didn't turn into a pile of ordinary iron. Qingyunzi thought for a moment, then asked cautiously, Fellow Daoist Black Moon, do you think this sword can still be used? Since I took it out to trade, it's naturally still useful, Black Moon Devil Monarch said faintly. Speaking of which, this sword is worthy of being Fu Yaozi's sword. After being corroded by devil aura for tens of thousands of years, it unexpectedly still retains the momentum of a spiritual treasure. Of course, everyone here understands that this sword definitely can't be used directly. It needs to dissolve the devil aura and be refined again to recover some of its original power, but only a little. Chapter 365. A sword from tens of thousands of years ago that had been stored in the devil's domain where devil cultivators lived for tens of thousands of years couldn't be intact. Yong Ryu and Qingyunzi also understood this point, but they still couldn't hide their disappointment after hearing Black Moon Devil Monarch's words. This was Fu Yaozi's sword, but it still had this kind of momentum. One could imagine how powerful it was in the past. Of course, if it hadn't been corroded by devil aura, nascent soul cultivators wouldn't have had the chance to take a fancy to core formation cultivators like them. After figuring this out, the two of them regained some of their composure. Qin Yunzi looked at the sword and asked cautiously, "Fellow Daoist Black Moon, what do you want to exchange this sword for? How many spirit stones do you want?" Black Moon Devil Monarch played with the spirit stones he had just exchanged and said casually, "We devil cultivators are different from you righteous cultivators. We need a special mental cultivation method to absorb spirit stones for our own use. Usually we just use them like money. So, you don't have to exchange them for spirit stones. If you see something suitable for devil cultivators, just give it to me." When he finished speaking, Qin Yunzi and Yong Ryu both had a troubled expression on their faces. It wasn't easy to find things for devil cultivators. After all, the spiritual aura of heaven and earth was the main source of energy for devil cultivators. In the beginning, devil cultivators used spiritual aura for their cultivation. Later, devil cultivators gathered in one place to cultivate, and the devil's domain was full of devil aura. Things that could be directly used by devil cultivators usually grew in devil's domain. There weren't many devil's domains in Yunzhong, only some specific places in northern Qilin Nation. The devil's domain was small and didn't have many resources. If there were, they would have been taken away by the local devil cultivators. They were pure Dao cultivators, so where could they get things for devil cultivators? Devil Monarch Black Moon obviously understood their difficulties, but he didn't back down. He picked up the rusty Fusheng sword, cast a sidelong glance at the two of them, then looked at Imo Tienga. "Miss Qin is also a cultivator. Are you interested in this Fusheng sword?" Imo Tienga glanced at Yong Ryu and Qin Yunzi, then said, "I'm naturally interested, but fellow Daoist Yong and fellow Daoist Qin Yun are very interested in this sword. I've only just arrived here, so how could I snatch it away?" He paused for a moment before continuing, "Moreover, it's really hard to find demonic cultivators' items. I'm afraid that fellow Daoist Xianxia won't be interested in the things I have on me." The Black Moon Devil Master smiled and said, "What's wrong with that? It's up to me whether I like him or not." Since Miss Qin has participated in our trade fair, she naturally has the qualifications to exchange. Fellow Daoists, don't you think so? The Black Moon Devil Monarch was in the late stage of the core formation realm, while Yong Ryu and Qin Yunzi were only in the early stage of the core formation realm. How could they dare to act tough in front of him? Moreover, what the Black Moon Devil Monarch said made sense. The trade fair was free to trade, and it was all up to the owner's preference. Seeing the two of them nod, the Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled and said, "All right, what do you have, Miss Qin? You can take it out and let us see." Imo Tienga hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she still took something out of her robe. She'd been to Demonic Mountain before. Demonic Mountain used to be the battlefield of the righteous path and the devil path. Countless treasures of the righteous path and the devil path were left there. Although most of them had been taken away by the predecessors, there were always some special things in that place where devil aura intertwined. She picked up a lot of people's Qinkuan bags inside. Qin she wasn't interested in these things, so he practically put them all into her pocket. There were some strange things produced on Demonic Mountain, but she didn't know much about devil cultivators, so she didn't know whether these things were useful or whether Black Moon Devil Monarch would like them or not. The Black Moon Devil Monarch watched as she took out a Qinkuan bag from her robe and took out things one by one. At first, his expression was indifferent, probably because these things didn't catch his eye. But as Imo Tienga took out more and more things, the Black Moon Devil Monarch's expression gradually became a bit surprised. When she took out one thing, he actually stood up abruptly. Imo Tienga stopped. The thing she took out was a jade box with a small black flower inside. She didn't know what it was, but she felt the devil aura was very heavy. She looked at Black Moon Devil Monarch's expression and thought this must be some kind of treasure to be able to shock a core formation devil cultivator so much. It was to the extent that even the other devil cultivator, Yang Qingji, who had not made a sound and was quietly sitting in the corner, moved his body, his gaze fixed on her hand. This thing, does fellow Daoist Black Moon like it? Black Moon Devil Monarch exhaled and slowly recovered his bewitching and narcissistic expression. He nodded and said, "This flower is called Devil Gathering Flower. It can only grow in places where devil aura is very abundant. The flower in Miss Qin's hand is at least 2,000 years old. It's enough to exchange for this Fuxing sword. Mo Tiange nodded and smiled. Fortunately, if it still doesn't work, I'll have to give up. Does fellow Daoist Black Moon mean you're willing to exchange the Fuxing sword for this devil-gathering flower? Of course. Black Moon Devil Monarch simply threw the Fuxing sword in his hand to her. This sword belongs to Mississippi. Mo Tiange closed the jade box and also threw it to Black Moon Devil Monarch. The two of them confirmed it and the transaction was completed. Both Yong Ryu and Qin Yun Z sighed when they saw this. This fellow Daoist Qin was also a Dao cultivator. Since she heard about the Fuxing sword's origin, she naturally wouldn't give it to her. The two of them could be considered to have missed the opportunity to obtain the Fuxing sword. After Black Moon Devil Monarch and Mo Tiange finished their transaction, Yang Qingji, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke and stopped Mo Tiange from putting the things away. Fellow Daoist Qin, these things are all devil cultivators' things. Are you willing to exchange them? Mo Tiange smiled. Of course. I'm a Dao cultivator. What use do I have for these things? Yang Qingji thought for a moment, then opened his Qingkuan bag and threw several things out. Then fellow Daoist Qin, take a look. Do you need these things? Mo Tiange stared at the things Yang Qingji threw on the table. They were all beast cores, most of which were 5th and 6th rank. There were more than a dozen of them. This surprised Mo Tiange a bit. Yang Qingji was only in the early stage of the core formation realm, but he actually had so many 5th and 6th rank beast cores. Apparently, his skills were quite extraordinary. She once heard that although Devil Path cultivators were prone to Qi energy deviation, their fighting abilities were stronger than Righteous Path cultivators in the same realm. She was skeptical at first, but now that she saw Yang Qingji taking out so many beast cores so easily, it was most likely true. These beast cores made the others very envious. Even Han Shizhi gasped in admiration several times. Beast cores were one of the few things that didn't belong to the Righteous Path or the Devil Path. Both Righteous Path and Devil Path cultivators could use them. The difference was that Righteous Path cultivators mostly used them to concoct medicinal pills while Devil Path cultivators mostly swallowed them directly. It wasn't that she didn't want these beast cores, they were equivalent to medicinal pills. She also learned the method of directly taking beast cores from Bichuan Court, so she could use them all no matter how many she had. However, the problem was that she didn't know the value of these devil cultivator things in her hands, so she didn't know how to exchange them. She thought for a moment, then said, "What does fellow Daoist Yang want to exchange for?" Yang Qingji's expression couldn't be clearly seen under his cloak. He said faintly, "Fellow Daoist Qin, you should know the value of these beast cores. They're enough to exchange for most of the things on the table. If fellow Daoist Qin trusts me, are you willing to let me choose for myself?" Mo Tiange only considered it for a moment before she smiled and agreed. "Sure." Yang Qingji nodded. "Thank you." As he spoke, he raised his hand. The things on the table flew towards him one by one as if they were being pulled. By the time most of the things were in his hands, he pushed his hand forward, throwing the beast cores on the table towards Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange caught all of them. She only took a brief look at the quality of the beast cores, then threw them into her Qingkuan bag. She then put away the remaining things on the table. After this transaction was completed, the scene was silent for a while. Because the things Devil Monarch Black Moon took out were too astonishing, the people behind him simply couldn't muster up the spirit to continue the transaction. In the end, it was Devil Monarch Black Moon who broke the silence. He asked Mo Tiange in a seemingly careless manner, "This monarch can see that Miss Qin is a pure Dao cultivator, so why do you have so many things used by devil cultivators? Could it be that Mrs. Hometown is also the devil domain?" Mo Tiange smiled faintly, then shook her head. "Since fellow Daoist Black Moon knows I'm a pure Dao cultivator, why would I live in the devil domain? I just had a conflict with several devil cultivators and obtained these things from them." "Oh, so that's how it is." What she meant was that these things were obtained from killing devil cultivators. Although she had a lot of things in her hands, they were very messy, so their total value wasn't very high. It would be believable if she said they were the possessions of 1 or 2 devil cultivators. In the current Yunzhong continent, the situation was no longer one where the righteous and devil paths could not coexist, so Devil Monarch Black Moon and Yang Qingji didn't react to what she said. Devil Monarch Black Moon was very happy to obtain the treasures he was satisfied with. He squinted at the others and said, "All right, Miss Qin has finished her transaction with us. Which fellow Daoist wants to exchange with us next?" After a moment of silence, Monk Yuan Kong called out the name of Buddha. "Amitabha, this poor monk has something to exchange." Devil Monarch Black Moon didn't even bother to say anything. He just stretched out his hand, signaling him to take out the item. Monk Yuan Kong also didn't waste any time. He directly took out a jade box and opened it. In an instant, the whole room was filled with a dazzling 7-colored light. 7-colored jade heart lotus. Han Shizhi cried out in surprise. Emo Tiange still didn't know anything about this item. However, judging by how it was overflowing with spiritual aura, she knew it was an extremely rare spiritual item. Moreover, Han Shizhi looked so shocked. Benefactor Han has good eyes. This is indeed the 7-colored jade heart lotus. Monk Yuan Kong smiled faintly. Although his appearance was very ugly and looked quite ferocious, his smile was filled with a kind and holy feeling. Perhaps this is the so-called Buddha's nature? Emo Tiange thought to herself. What does Master Yuan Kong want to exchange for? The one who spoke was Qiu Qingruo. She stared unblinkingly at the 7-colored jade heart lotus. Ever since Emo Tiange entered the room, this was the first time this beautiful Daoist nun acted like a cultivator instead of a wife strictly supervising her husband. Monk Yuan Kong still smiled faintly and said in a neither hurried nor slow manner, "Benefactor Qiu, this poor monk already said that in my early years, my sins of killing were very heavy. Now, I'm plagued by a demonic barrier and it's difficult for me to advance my cultivation. Therefore, I want to exchange this item for something that can reduce my sins of killing and remove my demonic barrier. Benefactor, do you have it?" You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.